Chapter 441. Lu Zishi suddenly threw away the shower. Forget it. Killing you will only dirty my hands. Scram. This was his room. He didn't want her to dirty it. Wei Wei Bai heard his words and her face turned even paler. It was as if she had been sentenced to death. She stammered, Lu Zishi was expressionless. Scram. Don't make me say it a second time. Frightened, Wei Wei Bai stood up, trembling. Then she slowly walked out. Halfway through, she was too weak and staggered a few steps. Unsteady on her feet, she bumped into Lu Zishi's arms. Lu Zishi was about to push her away. She hesitated, then suddenly grabbed his clothes. She looked up, her eyes red, and softly called out. Big brother. Lu Zishi stared blankly. Wei Wei Bai unconsciously bit her lip. Most of her body was rubbing against him. Her voice trembled, fragile, and sticky. Big brother. Simply seductive. And unconsciously seductive at that. Lu Zishi's breathing almost stopped. His muscles were as stiff as stone. Let go. Wei Wei Bai was even more scared. Her face was full of panic. Don't drive me away, big brother. I can do anything. These words, along with her moist and soft body, could drive any man crazy. But her eyes were terrifyingly pure. It was as if she didn't know how popular she was with beasts. Lu Zishi felt his breath heat up, but his eyes turned cold. Sure enough, she was the same as her mother. At such a young age, she already knew how to seduce people. He endured the fire in his chest and abdomen and was about to kick her away. All of a sudden, she let out a sob that she had been suppressing. She cried so pitifully that she practically curled into a ball in his arms. Big brother, are you my big brother? Lu Zishi paused in his push. She cried, don't drive me away. My mother will kill me. These words were full of fear. If you don't recognize me, she will be very, very angry. Her fingers gripped his clothes so tightly, as if he was her savior. A lot of Lu Zishi's anger was watered down by an inexplicable emotion. Ding, the male lead's favorability is -20. He seemed to have realized that something was wrong with him, so he finally hardened his heart and pushed her away. That's enough. You look so ugly when you cry. After saying that, he lifted his feet and walked out, not daring to look back. It was as if he was afraid that his heart would soften. Wei Wei Bai's face turned pale as she watched him leave. After a while. Only then did the system reply faintly, it's already far away, it won't suddenly return. The misery and cowardice on Wei Wei Bai's face stopped crying. She said indifferently, Lu Zishi's heart is harder than I thought. I thought it would rise to at least 10 points. Although the system was used to seeing the drama queen change her expression, it still couldn't help but say bitterly, can you be a little more feminine? My eyes can't stand you acting like a little white flower. Wei Wei Bai sighed. It's not that I don't want to slap Bai Ziwen so hard that she'll circle the earth and then force myself on Lu Zishi, robbing him of favorable impression points. However, what? Wei Wei Bai, however, Lu Zishi's mother died a tragic death. If I force myself, he'll probably treat me as an enemy and take revenge on me. At that time, the favorability would be -100 every minute. Wei Wei Bai, do you know what kind of identity can make Lu Zishi's favorability increase the most? The system was silent for a moment, then tried to say, wearing a bunny ear suit and calling him brother's little sister in bed? Wei Wei Bai. Tongzi, what kind of movies did you watch? Chapter 442. She resisted the urge to beat the system. No, I'm a victim like him. System, your mother was also forced to jump off a building by a mistress? Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. Give me back the cafeteria food you bought with my life points. System, I just ate it. I'll spit it out and give it back to you. It's still fresh and warm. Wei Wei Bai, After Lu Zishi walked out and saw the housekeeper, he stopped in his tracks. Young master. The housekeeper immediately greeted him. He was silent for a moment, then said reluctantly, have someone send over some ready-made women's clothes. Housekeeper, okay, what size do you want? Lu Zishi, 1, 65 meters tall, 42 kilograms weight, 3 measurements, long legs, broad shoulders. The first thing he said was super standard body measurements. The housekeeper nodded. Young master, you really know. This sentence made Lu Zishi choke. The housekeeper said again, you're a bit thin. Lu Zishi, don't look thin, it's just a small bone structure. It's very soft to the touch. Housekeeper. What did he just hear? Lu Zishi. What did he just say? The housekeeper suddenly smiled in understanding. I understand. Lu Zishi, what the fuck do you understand? The system waited for a long time. Why are you still pouring cold water on me? Wei Wei Bai's face was cold. Using self-injury to gain sympathy. I'm getting a fever to win sympathy. System, you've been pouring cold water on me for more than half an hour, but your physical condition is still very good. If you stay any longer, the male lead will come back. Wei Wei Bai sighed. This body has Sister Lin's shell, but it's as strong as an ox. System, are you still worried about your body being too healthy? Do you feel that you can't keep up with the times without coughing up blood every 3 steps? Do you, Wei Wei Bai, do you need a beating? If you promote the advertisement again, I'll beat you until you cough up 3 pounds of blood every step. The system spoke quickly, beautiful disease capsule, 1 capsule gives you a day's worth of HP. It allows you to fall sick without any worries. You can have a high fever or faint as you wish. You can have any illness you want. Wei Wei Bai. Let's buy it. She was beautiful even when she was sick. That sounded alright. After Lu Zishi finished giving his orders, he stayed by the railing and smoked in a particularly bad mood. He lowered his head and saw the grass downstairs. In a trance, he saw his mother dragging him and jumping off the roof of a building. He was lucky enough to be blocked by the canopy and saved his life. As for his mother, her limbs were twisted, and her flesh was mangled. Lu Zishi's face paled a bit. He took a few more puffs of his cigarette and then stopped his recollection. I will make Bai Ziwen and her daughter wish they were dead. Back then, it was because he knew about the existence of Wei Wei Bai. His mother had committed suicide because of her depression. Therefore, in his heart, Wei Wei Bai was no different from a murderer. Could she still be in his room? Lu Zishi calmly walked back, determined to drive her out of the room. He pushed the door open and entered, only to see a wet dress on the chair. Under the chair was a pair of light-colored, low-waisted panties. There was also a bra of the same color. They were all wet. Lu Zishi immediately looked away, only to see that on his big black bed, under the thin sheets, a beautiful curve of a body appeared. She even dared to sleep in his bed? Lu Zishi angrily walked over, lifted the sheets, and said through clenched teeth, Wei Wei Bai, you're courting death. She didn't have any reaction. She wore his shirt and didn't button up much of the collar. A large area of delicate white appeared. Lu Zishi didn't feel the slightest bit of pity. He reached out and grabbed her arm, only to find that her whole body was boiling hot. He frowned, loosened his hand, and touched her face. Hot to the touch, a severe fever. She seemed to have just realized that someone was here. She opened her eyes in a daze. Her pupils were moist and hazy. Suddenly, she revealed a dazed smile. Brother, you came to save me? Lu Zishi, save you? Wei Wei Bai, Mom kept hitting me. She said that if you liked me, you wouldn't hit me. Lu Zishi stared blankly. She softly reached out and grabbed his cuff. So when will you like me? Lu Zishi didn't answer. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. He didn't know why, but he felt somewhat uncomfortable. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 443. He didn't know what he was thinking. Did she hit you all the time? Wei Wei Bai's face was bright red. She blinked her almond eyes and looked at him with misty eyes. Her voice was weak and delicate. She didn't hit me all the time. She hit me once in a while. Lu Zixi face was expressionless, but his eyes were dark. Once in a while? How? Wei Wei Bai struggled to think. Maybe it was because of the fever, but she was unbelievably well behaved. Just, hit me with a chair or hit me with a clothes rack. Sometimes she won't let me eat because I'm not sensible. Lu Zixi frowned. You're not sensible. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she seemed very scared. She immediately picked up the quilt and covered herself, revealing 2 watery eyes. I ate too much, so I'm not sensible. Lu Zixi ate too much and not sensible. When he was young, he didn't eat a single meal. His entire family, including dozens of people, surrounded him, begging him to eat more. What kind of insensible behavior was this? Also, I talked too much and made Mom angry. Lu Zixi was deeply suspicious. What was the boundary of not being sensible? Talking too much was also not sensible. Was it holding a loudspeaker in the middle of the night and yelling in front of someone's bed? And me, I was sick and not sensible. Mom also hit me. Wei Wei Bai looked at him cautiously. Lu Zixi finally asked hesitantly, are you sick? What did being sick and not sensible have to do with it? Wei Wei Bai seemed to have been poked. She immediately jumped and said, I'm not sick. Really, I'm not sick. Lu Zixi cast a cold glance and suddenly grabbed her quilt. His fingers were about to touch her forehead. Wei Wei Bai closed her eyes in fright. She didn't dare to look at him and trembled. His fingers fell on her pure white forehead. It was scalding hot. It felt like burning someone to death. His frown deepened. Suddenly, her weak little hand gently placed on his wrist, trembling violently. Mom, she closed her eyes and pitifully said, I'm just too hot. I'm not sick. She even seemed to be trying to please him. Her fingers gently touched his wrist, and her eyes were slightly raised. She looked very innocent. However, the corners of her eyes were dyed red. This shy glance was pure and charming, moving one's heartstrings. Lu Zixi only felt the force of her fingertips lightly brushing against his wrist, causing a burst of numbness. He hurriedly withdrew his hand with an ugly expression on his face. If he didn't know that a person with such a high fever wouldn't be conscious. He even suspected that she was trying to seduce him. Mom. She was a little slow as she tilted her head and looked at him with her big, watery eyes. Lu Zixi coldly said, Who's your mother? Shut up. Wei Wei Bai immediately pouted and looked at him pitifully. There was no sense of accomplishment in bullying such a woman. Irritated, Lu Zixi loudly called for someone to come and had the housekeeper invite a doctor. He didn't want to torture her yet. She hung up first. Who was like him, so sullen even when taking revenge on someone? As a result, as soon as the doctor came in with a medical kit, Wei Wei Bai immediately reached out and grabbed his hand in fear. Lu Zixi only felt that her fingers were as soft as clouds as they tickled his palm. She was afraid to hide behind him. Don't come over. I'm not sick. Lu Zixi impatiently turned back. What are you doing? Do you want to die? Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened, and she gently let go of his hand. Then she lay back on the bed. Her face was red, her lips were dry and pale, and her eyes were so vacant that it made one's heart ache. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 444. Lu Zixi's heart tightened. He didn't know what to feel. Suddenly, she stealthily raised her hand and grabbed the corner of his shirt. Seeing that he hadn't noticed, Wei Wei Bai breathed a sigh of relief. Lu Zishi sensed her movements. For some reason, he was silent, but didn't shake off her hand. When the doctor arrived, he immediately took her temperature. It was close to 40 degrees, a temperature that could burn a person silly. Infusion, physiological cooling, medication, a series of combinations. Her fever began to subside. Her hands softly held onto his sleeve. From beginning to end, she didn't dare to let go. From beginning to end, Lu Zishi sat by the bed with a cold face. Were her hands tweezers? Why didn't she let go? Wasn't she tired? His face was dark. He took out a cigarette and was about to smoke when his fingers suddenly paused. Could a patient inhale secondhand smoke? Lu Zishi finally turned his head to look at her. He found that her cheeks were crimson, and her eyes were moist as she foolishly looked at him. Because of the heat, she kicked off the quilt. Her white shirt was in a complete mess, and the buttons were only casually done. She raised her head, her face covered in sweat from the fever. Under her fair swan neck, sparkling and translucent sweat fell to her chest, under that soft curve. Lu Zishi's fingers stiffened as he held the cigarette. His breathing became heavy. She suddenly moaned softly, as if in pain. Her beautiful long legs stretched out from under the quilt. Pink toes, well-proportioned calves, round thighs, Lu Zishi couldn't help but gulp. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -15. He immediately reached out and fiercely covered her with the quilt. Then he turned around and glared fiercely at the doctor who was looking at the four. The doctor was creeped out by his glare, and tactfully left. Lu Zishi then realized that his reaction wasn't right. He pursed his thin lips and lit the cigarette. Why did he care if Wei Wei Bai was a patient? He was going to smoke and kill her. The room was filled with the smell of smoke. The more he smoked, the more upset he became. Finally, Lu Zishi realized that he wasn't being too good to her. How could he treat the daughter of his enemy and give her medicine? The 10 great Qing tortures flashed through his mind. There were also all sorts of terrifying methods of torture. He shouldn't have let her live so comfortably. He pulled her up, threw her into ice water, and then put a ton of chili in it. Or, he could throw her into the sauna room, where the temperature would rise and steam her to death. Lu Zishi's lips curled into a cold smile. Then, he would cruelly turn around and let her die a horrible death. Unexpectedly, the sleeping person opened his eyes in a daze. Their gazes intertwined. Her lips suddenly curled up slightly as she smiled sweetly. Brother. The way she called him, Big Brother, was really delicate and soft. The ears of those who were listening were about to be captured. Lu Zishi, the top 10 tortures in his mind disappeared for a moment. She then closed her eyes tiredly. She still had a smile on her face. That's great. I dreamed of Big Brother again. He dreamt again, the last time they met, and the only time they met, wasn't it when she was 2 years old? Why would she dream of him again? Lu Zishi was just about to ask when he heard her whisper, I haven't had such a good dream in a long time. These words sounded inexplicably sad. Big Brother. She called him again in a low voice. Her voice was like a siren's, enchanting and pleasant. Big Brother, Lu Zishi was annoyed beyond words. What are you doing? / Chapter 445. Wei Wei Bai fell silent. Just when Lu Zishi thought she was asleep. Finally, he heard the sound of her broken sobs. That's great. Big Brother finally responded to me. I was so afraid of waking up. Then I wouldn't be able to dream of such a good thing. She was so sick that she wanted to die. He just responded to her, and she was so moved. Lu Zishi couldn't understand Wei Wei Bai's train of thought at all. His thoughts of revenge were once again extinguished by her. Wei Wei Bai unconsciously called out, Big Brother a few more times, and then fell into a deep sleep. Lu Zishi breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, the housekeeper walked over with light steps. "Young master, the information is here." Lu Zishi took the information and began to flip through it. The more he flipped, the gloomier his expression became. When he reached the end, he was about to throw the information out. But then he thought of something. He glanced at the person sleeping on the bed and swallowed his anger. Then he got up and walked out to a relatively distant place. He suddenly threw the information out and then kicked a decorative vase in the hallway. The information that flew to the ground was spread out. It was shockingly full of medical records and shocking pictures of scars. The things in the information. Lu Zishi thought he could only see it on the news. The beatings, torture, and imprisonment actually started when she was 2 or 3 years old. If he hadn't met Wei Wei Bai, he wouldn't have thought of investigating it. How did he find out about this? Bai Ziwen, that crazy woman, after leaving his father for a year, she couldn't bear the loneliness. She took the child and hooked up with other men. And she even left the 3-year-old Wei Wei Bai alone in a rented house. There was no drink when she was thirsty. There was no food when she was hungry. She almost starved to death several times in the rented house. Later, a community volunteer found her and saved her. That was why she was able to leave some paper information for him to search. Later, Lu Rinjia died. Bai Ziwen probably thought she couldn't return to the Lu family. So she began to abuse Wei Wei Bai, who was only a few years old. The most serious incident was when he hit her with a chair until her ribs were broken. Only after being admitted to the hospital could the information be kept. The information in the hospital was only recorded when she was seriously injured. But those countless small wounds, after being abused day and night, did not leave behind any scars. Bai Ziwen regarded Bai Weiwei as a trash can for her to vent her anger in a frenzy. In other words, Weiwei Bai grew up in an abusive environment. No wonder he was so submissive and his eyes were filled with fear. This information had only been transferred in a hurry. She wondered what other heartless things Bai Ziwen had done that had not been found out yet. Lu Zishi lowered his head and took out a cigarette. His stern face was frighteningly taut. He saw the information. He could almost see the tiny Weiwei Bai, covered in scars, cowering in a corner in fear. Suddenly, he saw that he was stepping on a piece of paper. Just now, he was too anxious to look at it, so he neglected this one. He bent down and picked it up. There was a paragraph on it. It said that there was a time when Weiwei Bai was abused and had hallucinations. She drew an elder brother on the paper to accompany her. This was also recorded by the medical team. Her brother was drawn. Not him, Lu Zishi couldn't help but sneer. Nonsense. How could Weiwei Bai recognize him at that time? No wonder she kept calling him brother when she was confused. The person she was calling was her imaginary brother. How desperate did a person have to be? She could only rely on her hallucinations to survive. Chapter 446. Lu Zishi lit a cigarette, his fingers trembling. The smile on his lips slowly turned bitter. Living so miserably, how the hell am I supposed to take revenge? The people he hated the most were the mother and daughter pair. Cheating wasn't enough to make his mother jump off a building. Weiwei Bai, that vile spawn, was the last straw that broke his mother's rationality. So the people he hated weren't just Bai Ziwen. Weiwei Bai was one of the main culprits. But when he saw the scars all over the floor, he couldn't help but feel hatred. Ding, the male lead's favorability is -5. The butler walked over and bent down to tidy up the information. When he saw the medical records on the paper, he couldn't help but sigh. This mother is also a beast. How did such a small child survive? When Lu Zishi heard this, the cigarette between his fingers fell to the ground. He immediately turned and left, afraid that if he heard a few more words, his heart would completely soften. No matter how hard a person's heart was, seeing a child being abused, it was impossible to remain indifferent. What's more, no matter how much he didn't admit it, Wei Wei Bai was also his sister. Ding, the male lead's favorability is 0. Wei Wei Bai was sleeping soundly when she heard the system's roar. The favorability went to 0 all of a sudden. What's going on? Is my system poisoned? Wei Wei Bai's head hurt. The after effects of the forced high fever made her limbs weak. She forced herself to think before saying, "Didn't I spend 3 days of my life points to make you fabricate information?" It was true that the original owner didn't live very well. Bai Ziwen didn't pay much attention to her daughter. So other than the necessary living expenses, she didn't take care of her. When she was young, she was also thrown to the nanny. After all, Bai Ziwen's face was still useful. She had done a lot of things like fooling around, so there was no problem for her to support herself. If she didn't get addicted to gambling later on, she wouldn't have turned her attention to the original owner. What child abuse, not giving her food, and so on. It was all fabricated by Wei Wei Bai when she watched legal programs. Now that she had life points, she could spend them appropriately to make the strategy easier. The system said, just those materials can make the male lead's favorability go straight to 0? Wei Wei Bai, of course, as long as you're not a beast, you won't even be able to sympathize with me, let alone hate me. If it weren't for Lu Zishi hating her for so many years. He reckoned that the favorability would increase by another wave. Now that the favorability had reached 0, it was worth it to live for the past 3 days. The system said, why don't I feel anything when I look at the data? Wei Wei Bai, because you're a beast. Xiao Yi hurriedly rushed over from the shooting location. Why do you have time to ask me out? Are you going to change your mind and make a comeback? The man sitting sideways on the chair had an astonishingly perfect side profile under the light. Under his high nose, his thin lips were slightly pursed. His eyes were beautiful peach blossom eyes, but they were slightly narrower than peach blossom eyes. He glanced at them indifferently. The light in his eyes was so dazzling that it could capture one's soul. Just by simply sitting there, his entire body was filled with drama. This was Lu Zishi. He said coldly, I asked you out for a drink. Xiao Yi raised his hand for the bartender to bring the wine. Is there something bothering you? If there wasn't anything bothering him, he wouldn't have come here to drink. Lu Zishi's eyes were cold. No. Xiao Yi said, of course there is. Could it be a woman's matter? Lu Zishi's mind was a bit scattered. He hadn't gone back for a week because he didn't know how to face Wei Wei Bai. Hating her made him think of her miserable past. If he didn't hate her, he would feel sorry for her. Suddenly, Lu Zishi looked up at the TV in front of the bar. It was advertising time. Bright colors, an emerald green forest, and a slender white figure ran out of the green like an elf. She wore a knee-length white skirt, and her soft long hair was tied into a playful high ponytail. Under the sunlight, she suddenly looked back and smiled. The bright light fell into her eyes, stunning everyone. Xiao Yi stood up at once. Good seedling. Her ability to perform on camera is amazing. Lu Zishi stared blankly at the TV. Wei Wei Bai. In the camera, she was unbelievably smart and witty. Those cowardly and fearful expressions had all disappeared. Lu Zishi didn't know why, but his heart seemed to be stirred. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 5. // For convenience next time, you can click on the Chapter 447. Xiao Yi clutched his heart. I can't do it. Who is this girl? She's my angel. I'll definitely find her. Suddenly, he felt a little chilly. Xiao Yi turned his head and saw Lu Zishi looking at him with cold eyes. Those eyes seemed to hold a grudge against him. Xiao Yi trembled. What did he say just now? Did he offend Lu Zishi? Lu Zixi's face was cold. He glanced at the TV again. The commercial had ended. He fiercely downed the wine in his hand, then got up to pay the bill. I'm leaving. Xiao Yi, wait, didn't you invite me to drink? But Lu Zixi had already taken a step forward and left. Xiao Yi stayed in place with a sluggish expression. He belatedly remembered that this guy, Lu Zixi, seemed to only pay his own bill. Did he have to be so stingy? He was clearly the one who invited him. Bai Weiwei's commercial completely exploded in popularity. In fact, when Bai Weiwei ran to shoot an advertisement, she didn't expect the advertisement to be broadcast so quickly. She had shot the commercial purely because of the reward from the previous world side mission. Ding, reward, pinnacle little fresh temperament. Whether you're walking with your nose up in the air, holding a brick while eating mutton skewers with a ferocious expression, or spitting on the street, you can reach 360 degrees without any blind spots. Pure and moving, cute and beautiful, like the nation's first love. What a good reward. It was just that this commercial was too disgusting. To verify the effect of the reward, she shot an ordinary green tea commercial. She casually smiled at the camera. Then she blushed. Now, the streets were filled with posters of her looking back and smiling, her eyes full of sunshine. Green tea sister posts were everywhere on the internet. Weiwei Bai, if I had known, I wouldn't have shot the green tea commercial. Green tea sister, that was too unpleasant to hear. Even if it was just milk tea, it would have been fine. Weiwei Bai returned home, to Bai Ziwen's home. After shooting the commercial, she didn't take anything with her and left the Lu family. The system was still advising her, the pavilion closest to the water enjoys moonlight first, why are you still leaving? Weiwei Bai was unperturbed. The smell is far, but the smell is near. Moreover, I'm with Bai Ziwen. It would be strange if Lu Zixi didn't have any reaction. The abused sister returned to the side of the sadist. Any brother with a bit of conscience would be soft-hearted. Bai Ziwen was at home. She was drunk when she saw Weiwei Bai coming back. He began to curse, why are you only back now? Do you know how many times Director Lin has looked for me? She desperately wanted Bai Weiwei to recognize her ancestors and return to her family. But seeing Lu Zixi's attitude, Bai Ziwen also knew that there was almost no hope for her to acknowledge her ancestors. Lu Rinjia was also dead, so there was even less hope. Therefore, she gave up on the idea of returning to her family. She wanted to sell Weiwei Bai for some money. Weiwei Bai leisurely sat on the sofa and then opened the dessert that she had just bought. While eating, she watched Bai Ziwen act like a drunkard. Bai Ziwen continued to curse. If it wasn't for me, would you still be alive? You should be grateful. Weiwei Bai sucked on a mouthful of cream. Delicious. Look at how ugly you are now. If you want to act and be a star, do you think you can do it without sleeping with the director? Weiwei Bai had a calm expression and continued to eat dessert. I'm talking to you. You actually dare to eat. Bai Ziwen was drunk. She belatedly realized that Weiwei Bai had been facing her with the back of her head from beginning to end. And she was eating very calmly. She was angry. She staggered over and was about to grab Weiwei Bai's hair. I'm talking to you. Do you hear me? Weiwei Bai turned her head and reached out to grab her wrist. With a twist, she pulled hard and pushed her entire body to the ground. Address of the full article, https://www. Sashu.com. Address of the Chapter 445. Weiwei Bai fell silent. Just when Lu Zixi thought she was asleep. Finally, he heard the sound of her broken sobs. That's great. Big brother finally responded to me. I was so afraid of waking up. Then I wouldn't be able to dream of such a good thing. She was so sick that she wanted to die. He just responded to her, and she was so moved. Lu Zishi couldn't understand Wei Wei Bai's train of thought at all. His thoughts of revenge were once again extinguished by her. Wei Wei Bai unconsciously called out, "Big brother," a few more times, and then fell into a deep sleep. Lu Zishi breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, the housekeeper walked over with light steps. "Young master, the information is here." Lu Zishi took the information and began to flip through it. The more he flipped, the gloomier his expression became. When he reached the end, he was about to throw the information out. But then he thought of something. He glanced at the person sleeping on the bed and swallowed his anger. Then he got up and walked out to a relatively distant place. He suddenly threw the information out and then kicked a decorative vase in the hallway. The information that flew to the ground was spread out. It was shockingly full of medical records and shocking pictures of scars. The things in the information. Lu Zishi thought he could only see it on the news. The beatings, torture, and imprisonment actually started when she was 2 or 3 years old. If he hadn't met Wei Wei Bai, he wouldn't have thought of investigating it. How did he find out about this? Bai Ziwen, that crazy woman, after leaving his father for a year, she couldn't bear the loneliness. She took the child and hooked up with other men. And she even left the 3-year-old Wei Wei Bai alone in a rented house. There was no drink when she was thirsty. There was no food when she was hungry. She almost starved to death several times in the rented house. Later, a community volunteer found her and saved her. That was why she was able to leave some paper information for him to search. Later, Lu Rinjia died. Bai Ziwen probably thought she couldn't return to the Lu family. So she began to abuse Wei Wei Bai, who was only a few years old. The most serious incident was when he hit her with a chair until her ribs were broken. Only after being admitted to the hospital could the information be kept. The information in the hospital was only recorded when she was seriously injured. But those countless small wounds, after being abused day and night, did not leave behind any scars. Bai Ziwen regarded Bai Weiwei as a trash can for her to vent her anger in a frenzy. In other words, Weiwei Bai grew up in an abusive environment. No wonder he was so submissive and his eyes were filled with fear. This information had only been transferred in a hurry. She wondered what other heartless things Bai Ziwen had done that had not been found out yet. Lu Zishi lowered his head and took out a cigarette. His stern face was frighteningly taut. He saw the information. He could almost see the tiny Weiwei Bai, covered in scars, cowering in a corner in fear. Suddenly, he saw that he was stepping on a piece of paper. Just now, he was too anxious to look at it, so he neglected this one. He bent down and picked it up. There was a paragraph on it. It said that there was a time when Weiwei Bai was abused and had hallucinations. She drew an elder brother on the paper to accompany her. This was also recorded by the medical team. Her brother was drawn. Not him, Lu Zishi couldn't help but sneer. Nonsense. How could Weiwei Bai recognize him at that time? No wonder she kept calling him brother when she was confused. The person she was calling was her imaginary brother. How desperate did a person have to be? She could only rely on her hallucinations to survive. Chapter 449. This kind of scum. Bai Ziwen actually sent Weiwei Bai to this kind of scum and pervert's bed? And it wasn't the first time. She ran away last time. Lu Zishi heard the familiar name of the hotel inside the door. Wasn't it the hotel where he woke up last time? Could it be that the last time she ran into his room was an accident? Lu Zishi frowned and thought about it. He felt that Weiwei Bai's personality wasn't like a woman who was used to climbing into bed. If she had the IQ, she wouldn't have returned to Bai Ziwen's side and been beaten, scolded, and sold. He brought her back to the Lu family. If she was thick-skinned, the right thing to do would be to cling on to him and not let him go. But when he got home, he found out that she was long gone. Suddenly, the door quieted down. Lu Zixi's fingers trembled, and some terrible speculations flashed through his mind. Wei Weibai had been beaten to death. She deserved to be beaten to death. What did it have to do with him? Lu Zixi smiled coldly. His delicate features were gloomy, but his gaze was particularly ruthless. He wasn't a good person. Bai Ziwen's mother was worse than death. That was what he wanted to see the most. His daughter would be the first to suffer. Then he would deal with Bai Ziwen. Killing two birds with one stone. Suddenly, Wei Weibai's weak voice came intermittently from the door. Big brother, this call was so faint that it was almost inaudible. But Lu Zixi didn't know how he heard it. Wei Weibai was calling him. He couldn't help but walk to the door and hear Wei Weibai say, "When are you going to protect me?" Suddenly, Lu Zixi reacted. Wei Weibai wasn't calling him at all. Instead, she was calling, the one who never appeared, the brother she imagined. The brother she made up. Would protect her. Lu Zixi's heart tightened, and his breathing became difficult. It was as if there was a blockage in his lungs. It was very uncomfortable. He suddenly turned around and left, his footsteps frighteningly fast. It was as if he was afraid that if he stayed for a few more seconds, he would do something he would regret. Walking out of the corridor, he saw several posters on the bulletin board in front of him. The girl on the posters had a pure and beautiful smile. Her eyes were clear and bright. It was as if he had never seen the darkness of the world. It was Wei Weibai's green tea commercial. This commercial was not a high-end commercial. It was very normal for a director to film. But because of the existence of Wei Weibai, it became popular. Those who were still looking for green tea sister did not know that she was being abused by her own mother. Lu Zixi lowered his head, his eyes somewhat red. He didn't know if he was angry or sad. He suddenly said to himself coldly, she deserved it. She deserved to die. Yes, his mother would jump off a building. It was all because of her birth, so don't expect him to admit that, she was his sister. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 10. When Wei Weibai heard the reminder, she knew that Lu Zixi's heart had finally softened a little. Hearing that she had such a miserable life. Even if he hated her to death, he would definitely sympathize with her. Everyone had a bad side to them. Seeing the person he hated lead a miserable life would definitely make him feel happy. If it was worse, he might even fake sympathy in his heart. Lu Zixi was in this state. Even if it was fake sympathy, it was still a favorability. Wei Weibai, he left. System, he saw you in such a miserable state and felt relieved, so he walked very far away. Wei Weibai, this system didn't know how to speak human language. Bai Ziwen also sobered up a little and noticed that something was wrong. She threw things, but it didn't seem to hit Wei Weibai. Why was her cheap daughter crying so miserably? At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://sashu.com. Chapter 450. Wei Weibai wore a light blue short-sleeved dress and tidied up her long hair. She took out a small mirror and looked at herself. Very good, youthful, cute, and moving. Her makeup was nude, emphasizing her soft and sweet beauty. Most importantly, it was waterproof. The system deeply suspected that its host had forgotten where it was. Wei Weibai, Tong Bao, do you think I'm only 12 years old? Tong Bao. If you say so. The system was depressed. What should it do when the host is always like this? What else could it do? Wei Weibai, I think my eyes should be rounder, don't you think so? The system was weathered, if you say so. Wei Weibai, the color of the lipstick is a bit dark, I'll adjust it a bit and make it lighter. System, can you adjust the color of lipstick? The hairstyle should be more fluffy, I'll scratch it. The hairstyle looked fluffy, so it was done by hand? I'm missing an eyebrow, I'll draw it. System, how did you know that it was missing a strand? How could you tell? And how could you draw the eyebrows like this? Wei bai, bow, the devastated system finally hugged its head and cried out miserably, don't nag me about this, I'm not listening, are you here to conquer or to become a beauty blogger? Wake up, you still need to cut off people's little nipples. And if the host kept calling bow bow bow, it would become the first nervous system in history to strangle its own host. Wei bai stuffed everything into the makeup bag and then put it into her backpack. Then she very calmly picked up the cup and slowly drank the water. The hotel room's bathroom door opened. A short, fat, and ugly old man walked out with a smile. He saw Wei bai sitting on the sofa, drinking water with her head down. That water, he had added some hallucinogens. Director Lin's wretched smile deepened. He had been coveting Wei bai for a long time, she was cute and pure. And for some reason, she looked even more fresh and beautiful today. Uncle has already prepared the female lead position for you, as long as you accompany Uncle for one night, hee hee. Wei bai finished drinking the water and confirmed that Lu Zishi had entered the hotel. She looked up and smiled. This smile immediately made Director Lin's heart itch unbearably. He repeatedly said, my little baby, come to Uncle. Bai Weiwei looked at his oily face with 3 layers of chin and said to the system in disgust, Tongzi, it turns out it's so disgusting to be called a baby. The system was gratified. You finally understand how I feel. Weiwei Bai, Lu Zishi. System, there are still 10 seconds. Bai Weiwei nodded and suddenly threw herself on the bed. Got up, ran, and flew so 2 seconds. Fatty Lin saw that Weiwei Bai couldn't wait, so he immediately shook his fat body and climbed onto the bed. Uncle won't treat you badly, the female lead is you. Weiwei Bai waited for him to climb onto the bed, but 5 seconds had passed. There were still 3 seconds. She immediately lay flat. Then, her eyes went blank and her limbs went soft. She had an appearance of delirium. Fatty Lin was stunned. The drug took effect so quickly. Didn't it take at least 10 minutes to take effect? But he didn't think too much about it. Instead, he happily pounced on her. Uncle will dote on you right now. 10 seconds were up. He had just pressed on top of her when he heard the door being violently kicked open. There was a loud bang. It gave people a fright. Chapter 451. Putting aside the fact that he hated her. She was really cute. She had no offensive power, and her eyes were round and clean. Lu Zishi looked and looked. Then, for some reason, he picked up his phone and took a picture of her peaceful sleeping face. Then he posted it on his WeChat moments. He wouldn't let Bai Ziwen go back. If she went back, she would either be beaten or sold. No matter how ruthless he was, he couldn't sit by and watch her be humiliated to the point where she couldn't live. So, if he wanted to recognize her as a sister, he had to let his friends in the circle get to know her first. He chose the picture he had just taken of her and wrote, "My sister." But then he thought of some of the dirty deals in the circle and was afraid that others would misunderstand. So, his face immediately darkened and he emphasized, "Biological sister." I just recognized her. He thought no one would see it. At this time, at 2 or 3 in the morning, they were either having fun or sleeping. But he didn't expect. The picture immediately had people like it and leave comments. He clicked on it and took a look. Fuck, she's so cute. Why didn't my dad get me a biological sister outside? With this kind of sister, what's the point of having my dad cheat? Tomorrow, I'll encourage my dad to cheat. B replied to A, your mom will break all 4 of your dad's legs. C, welfare late night welfare. TSK, this face, this chest, these legs, I've never seen such a pure and lovely woman. A reply to C, I only saw the face. Where did the legs and breasts come from? C replied wretchedly, hee, with this kind of face, she must have those kind of legs and breasts. When Lu Zishi saw this kind of message, anger rose in his heart and he took a picture of a pure sleeping face. This group of wretches even imagined the breasts and legs. He swiped his finger and blacklisted C, then, all kinds of messages came out. Give me a dozen sisters like this. No, I'm going to ask my dad if he has an illegitimate daughter outside. There were also some shameless ones who directly called out to Lu Zishi, brother-in-law, I'll come to propose marriage tomorrow. Do you like the land east of the city or my family's 12 private jets? I'll immediately bring them to your door as betrothal gifts. Lu Zishi immediately blacklisted them. This one was also blacklisted. That one was also blacklisted. A bunch of idiots whose brains were filled with yellow filth. They were all blacklisted. Finally, when his WeChat moments quietened down, he sneered, do you really think that your father can give birth to such a cute little sister? Ugly people are more mischievous. Then, he looked at the photos he had taken. Wei Weibai turned her face to the side and laid in his arms. Her white and delicate cheeks were tinged with light pink, and a few strands of black hair were scattered messily in front of his chest. Fair, delicate, beautiful, pure. Lu Zishi suddenly and silently deleted the photo. It was too beautiful to be posted on his WeChat moments. Among the people he added, there was no lack of rich second-generation hedonistic sons and such. Who would know that when they looked at the photos? What would that group of wretched people think? After deleting the photos, Lu Zishi belatedly realized what he had done. Not only did he admit that Wei Weibai was his younger sister, but he also admitted that she was his younger sister. He even deleted the photos and forbade others from seeing them. He was bewitched. Lu Zishi's mood was a bit chaotic. Then, he lowered his head and saw that she was quietly and softly sleeping. Even the sound of breathing could barely be heard. He didn't know why, but his heart also quieted down. Lu Zishi silently stared at her sleeping face. As he stared, his eyelids grew heavy, and he actually fell asleep. Only then did the system yawn and give a reminder. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 35. Chapter 452. Lu Zishi vaguely woke up. Half asleep, he realized that there was something soft in his arms. He immediately woke up with a start and saw Wei Weibai with her head tilted, curled up in his arms. His arm rested horizontally above her head. Her breath gently brushed against his bare chest, bringing a burst of itchiness. Lu Zishi's body stiffened for a while before he carefully moved. He pushed her out of his arms. Wei Weibai very meekly turned over and continued to sleep. The quilt fell to her abdomen, and under her disheveled shirt, her fair skin was seductively exposed. Lu Zishi's breathing deepened, and he immediately got out of bed. He hurried to the bathroom. When he came out again, he saw Wei Weibai hugging the sheets, sitting alone on the bed, looking at him warily. Lu Zishi's footsteps paused. He tugged at the corners of his mouth, wanting to greet her naturally. But when he thought of his behavior last night, in addition to his previous disgust towards her, it was indeed a bit perverted. He could only expressionlessly say, "You'll live here from now on. I'll have someone clean up a room for you." With that, he turned around and left. Suddenly, she softly called out from behind him, "Big brother?" She probed with some uncertainty. Lu Zishi had already walked to the door. He stopped and was silent for a moment before faintly replying, "N." This N seemed to unlock the shackles of the old enmity between them. Lu Zishi felt a burst of relief. Suddenly, the sound of light footsteps came from behind him. A soft body hugged him from behind. She hugged his back and softly called out again, big brother. This big brother was filled with boundless joy. Her voice was cheerful. Even if you only recognize me for a day, I'll be very happy. Lu Zixi nose soured, and he let her hug him. After a long time, he said, more than a day. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 40. System. This terrifying increase in favorability is abnormally fast. After brushing up a good wave of favorability, Wei Wei Bai finally gave up tormenting Lu Zixi for the time being. She began to manage her own acting career. Green Tea Sisters commercial is still very popular. After all, Wei Wei Bai was too good-looking. Every man had a cute little sister in their heart. Every girl had a little fresh dream in her heart. And Wei Wei Bai undoubtedly met all of these criteria. The Green Tea Company had also called her, saying that many people had contacted her and wanted her to shoot commercials or act in shows. Even Wei Wei Bai had rejected her, because she had her eyes on a recent blockbuster. It was Xiao Yi's new movie, Dream Like Flowers. The system said, take advantage of your sister's popularity and work hard to increase her favorability. Why did you go and act? Wei Wei Bai said righteously, because this is the only way to openly seduce others. What? Wei Wei Bai, you don't understand. Just the identity of a younger sister isn't enough to increase favorability. That's why we need to use external forces to stimulate Lu Zixi and increase his favorability. System, with such a wretched mentality and plan, can you not say it so openly? Lu Zixi looked at Xiao Yi somewhat impatiently. It's time to get off work. If you have something to say it quickly. Xiao Yi's face was filled with pride. I found the role of the younger sister in Dream Like Flowers. Lu Zixi absent-mindedly looked at the time. Congratulations. He had been getting off work early these past few days. Every time he came home, he would see a pink figure quietly peeking at him. When she saw that he was back, she would run away like a frightened rabbit. This younger sister of his was a bit timid. But the housekeeper had told him that every time he got off work, she would silently wait for him at the door. Sometimes when he came back late, she would keep waiting and not eat. After that, he went back much earlier. Xiao Yi smiled and said, she's called Wei Wei Bai. She's the Green Tea Sister who was very popular on the internet. Lu Zixi casually responded, then looked up and said coldly, who are you talking about? Xiao Yi led Lu Zixi downstairs. She's in the practice room downstairs, practicing with the actor who's playing her brother. Lu Zixi hurried to the practice room. He saw Wei Wei Bai smiling innocently and sweetly. She reached out and hugged a man. She looked up and softly said, brother. Brother, Lu Zixi only felt a surge of fire rising up in him. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 453. Wei Wei Bai wore a small white dress with an off-the-shoulder neckline, revealing her beautiful collarbone. She was like a pixie, her clear eyes filled with only that strange man. Her face was full of joy and excitement. Big brother, you just came to see me. The man was a little fresh meat. His handsome and fair face revealed a spring breeze-like smile. He reached out with both hands and lifted Wei Wei Bai into a princess carry. Didn't I just win the war and rush over to see you? Wei Wei Bai naturally reached out and hugged his neck. Her head nestled in his embrace, a trace of sadness overflowing from her eyes. I don't want you to go to war. I only want Big Brother to be by my side, to love me, to protect me. The man immediately felt distressed. I also want to stay by your side for the rest of my life, but the country needs me. Wei Wei Bai's almond-shaped eyes held a smile. She suddenly leaned close to him. Her soft and delicate face carried pure admiration, causing him to momentarily forget his script and stare blankly. Big brother, I also need you. The man felt a little breathless. So soft, so cute. He really wanted to take her home. One was pure and sweet, the other young and handsome. From a distance, their posture was intimate and well-matched. It was simply blinding to the eyes. Xiao Yi was still talking non-stop. Look, how well-matched. In this movie of mine, the brother and sister's relationship is a big highlight. They secretly love each other, but they can't be together because of the secular world. That kind of strong taboo feeling should be acted out by two pure people. The person playing the brother was the newly promoted super-popular little fresh meat Qian, only 19 years old. He had a young and handsome face and was indeed very pure. She was only 18 years old, the best and cutest age. She was a perfect match for Qian. Standing outside the practice room, Lu Zixi eyes were gloomy and indifferent. The corners of his mouth pulled into a fake smile. So, how do you plan to let this pair of pure brother and sister act out the taboo love? The words, brother and sister, were especially fiercely enunciated. It felt like he couldn't wait to chew them up and swallow them. Xiao Yi was like a blind and deaf person. He didn't hear the twisted mockery in his tone at all. Let's have an accidental kissing scene, an uncontrollable passionate kiss, and finally, a bed scene. Think about it. The girl's back is exposed, and she's lying in her brother's arms. It's so exciting. Lu Zixi only felt that the fire had reached the top of his head and was about to burn the entire practice room to ashes. In the practice room, the brother and sister were still hugging each other and looking at each other sweetly. Damn it, did he need to hug her for so long? The rehearsal should be over, right? Why are you still hugging me? And that Qian, what's with that look in his eyes? He was just short of pouncing on his sister. In the future, if there were to be a kissing scene or a bed scene, it wouldn't become a reality, right? Lu Zixi was also someone who had acted before. There were plenty of instances in the entertainment industry where fake things became real. He finally couldn't stand it anymore. He immediately walked in and pulled Wei Wei Bai out of Qian's arms. Wei Wei Bai jumped in fright. When she looked up and saw that it was Lu Zixi, her eyes were full of smiles. Brother. Her voice was sweet and seductive. It made Lu Zixi's heart tremble. And Qian also immediately called out, brother. Lu Zixi's face darkened. Who are you calling brother? And Qian immediately said cutely, whoever is Wei Wei's brother is my brother. Wei Wei Bai returned a smile. Ah Qian, do you lack a brother that much? And Qian raised a super handsome smile. I don't lack a brother, but I lack a sister. Lu, light bulb, non-existent Ziyan. Fast transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Download the full article, https://www.sashu.com. Download the full article, https://www.sashu.com. Download the full article, https://m.sashu.com//. Chapter 454. They were already flirting with each other. Were they going to roll around together next? He suddenly smiled, but his voice was as cold as the Siberian wind, chilling people to the core. You don't have to come tomorrow. I think the role of the older brother in Dreamlike Blossoms doesn't suit you. And Qian stared blankly for a moment before realizing that the person in front of her was Lu Zixi. Although Lu Zixi had retired for a few years, who didn't know him? Not to mention, this movie was invested in by Tian Na Corporation, so he was indeed qualified to change roles. Xiao Yi had already rushed over. Don't, big brother. I'm about to start shooting. Your last-minute change will kill me. Lu Zixi gloomily looked at him. If I say change, then change. Otherwise, I'll withdraw my investment. Xiao Yi simply threw a tantrum. Big brother's role isn't settled. The movie can't be filmed. If you withdraw your investment, I'll hang myself in front of your office. Lu Zishi, then don't film. He had invested several hundred million, and now he didn't film. If he had so much money, why didn't he burn it first? He could still use it after hanging himself. Suddenly, a small hand gently tugged at the corner of his clothes. Lu Zishi lowered his head. But all he saw was the top of Wei Wei Bai's head. She seemed a little nervous, her pink fingers clutching at the corner of his clothes. Big brother. This movie is very good. Can't we film it? Her voice was a little sad because her head was lowered, so he couldn't see her expression. She was so cautious, even her sadness was restrained and restrained. Lu Zishi's cold expression couldn't help but soften. You like this movie? Wei Wei Bai immediately raised her head, her eyes shining. Her small face without makeup was full of expectation. She nodded, and her ponytail swayed. She looked exceptionally soft and cute. Lu Zishi's mouth and brain seemed to be out of sync. The rational side of his brain clearly told himself very calmly that it was just a lousy movie. If he withdrew his investment, then so be it. But his mouth said first, then let's continue filming. The light in Wei Wei Bai's eyes turned into a smile. The corners of her mouth slightly curved, her delicate eyebrows moved with joy. Thank you, big brother. You're the best. Her voice was soft and sweet, causing his eardrums to tremble. Moreover, her smile was especially bright and infectious, causing him to reveal a trace of a smile. Xiao Yi very tactlessly ran over and said, then if we don't withdraw our investment, can we continue filming? The smile at the corner of Lu Zishi's mouth froze again. He raised his eyelids, and the coldness in his eyes was like a knife, stabbing at the little fresh meat next to him. And Qian was dumbfounded, as if he didn't know why he was being targeted. Lu Zishi thought about how if she was going to film, she would have to kiss, hug, and have sex scenes with this pretty boy in front of her, and also have a crush on him. A sour feeling welled up in his heart. He sneered, he's just a good-for-nothing with no strength. Can he act well? Xiao Yi, of course, why not? He's the best newcomer this year. Have you seen the XX movie? Have you seen the XX series? He's definitely capable. A trace of worship appeared on Wei Wei Bai's face, and she secretly glanced at Qian. The coldness in Lu Zishi's eyes deepened. Oh, it's just a little best newcomer award, and he dares to call himself capable? And Qian, who didn't say anything, obediently stood to the side. One was a director, the other was a film emperor and a boss. He didn't dare to speak. Xiao Yi nodded repeatedly. Of course. Didn't you win the Best Newcomer award in your first year? Chapter 455. Wei Wei Bai's sparkling eyes looked at him again. Lu Zishi felt both physically and mentally happy. He humphed faintly. It's just a newcomer award. I've won the Best Actor award 3 times. Yes, he won the newcomer award in the first year, and the Best Actor award in the second year. Then he retired. He was simply a legend in the entertainment industry. Wei Wei Bai tilted her head, her face a little red. Suddenly, she said in a sweet voice, "Brother, you're so amazing." This sentence was so sweet that it could shatter his reason a little. He suddenly said, "It's just a so-so. Just like when you were rehearsing just now, that gigolo didn't act well enough. Whether it was his manners or his lines, they weren't good enough." Wei Wei Bai stared blankly at him with a soft and cute face. Worship and concentration. Lu Zishi felt that under this kind of gaze, he would even pluck the stars from the sky, not to mention acting as a commentator. He suddenly said, "You say the lines, we'll rehearse." Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment, then said in a soft voice, "Brother, you just came to see me." Lu Zishi's expression suddenly changed. The tranquility in his deep eyes suddenly shattered, and joy overflowed from his heart. The tips of his brows and the corners of his eyes were filled with the pure smile of seeing his beloved little sister. He suddenly bent down and neatly picked her up. Wei Wei Bai cried out in surprise. His lips moved to her ear and he whispered, "Hug my neck, just like you did in the rehearsal." Her ears were sensitive. His gentle breath brushed past, and her ears turned red. Lu Zixi's eyes darkened. She had already extended her lotus-like arms and gently placed them on his shoulders. He revealed a heroic smile and wantonly said, "Didn't I just finish winning the battle, so I rushed over to see you?" A young general, full of heroic spirit. At this moment, Lu Zixi's suit seemed to transform into the armor of an ancient general. His ability to immerse himself in the character and his charisma was astonishing. Wei Wei Bai also seemed to be in character. Her eyes held unsuppressible longing, sadness, and joy. All kinds of complicated emotions were entangled together. In the end, she buried her head in his chest and said in a muffled voice, "I don't want you to go to war. I only want Big Brother to be by my side, to love me, to protect me." This sentence did not seem to be an act. But it seemed like she was revealing her true feelings. She even repeated in a low voice, "I only want Big Brother by my side." He suddenly remembered that when she was being abused, there was a time when she had drawn a picture of an older brother to accompany her. As if that would be the only way to protect her. She was spared the horrible torture. Although he had lost his mother during his childhood, his entire family revolved around him. He lived a life of luxury and insufferably arrogance. She, on the other hand, had been abused. She didn't eat or drink and had to be hospitalized several times because of serious injuries. Lu Zixi suddenly felt that she had so easily recognized him as her brother. Was it because she was already in despair that any random person would save her? She would resign herself to her fate and follow him, calling him brother. Thinking of this, Lu Zixi couldn't help but hug her even more tightly. His eyes glared fiercely at the two men present. The innocent-looking Qian and Xiao Yi felt a chill run down their backs. They felt like Lu Zixi was going to eat them. Then he walked out with Wei Wei Bai in his arms. Xiao Yi anxiously said, "Then the role of Big Brother." Lu Zixi's footsteps paused. He turned around with a smile that wasn't a smile. "I'll play it." How could he not see through Xiao Yi's provocation? Chapter 456. And Qian's appearance wasn't suitable for the role of a brother. Because he had to invest, he had read the script. Qian's gigolo was more like the last emperor in the drama. If he guessed correctly, Xiao Yi had deliberately led him to watch this play. It was to make him have no choice but to go into battle himself, so that his sister wouldn't be kissed and have a bed seen by a strange wretched man. He knew it was a trap. He looked down and saw her leaning on his chest, her lips curved sweetly as if she was very happy. The depression in his heart from being schemed against dissipated. Forget it, a trap is a trap. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 45. The cast of Dreamlike Blossoms announced that Qian would play the last emperor, Chu Xianping. Fans, looking forward to it, the best newcomer. He has looks, strength, and his own popularity. Wei Wei Bai played the great general's sister, Yan Qiqi. Fans, green tea sister. Although she looks good, is she good at acting? She can't be an idiot, right? Lu Zixi played the young general, Yan Yi. The fans were collectively silent for 3 seconds, then exploded. God, my husband is coming back. Someone stab me and let me know that this isn't a dream. Brother Lu, I love you, I love you. I've been a fan since you debuted. You're this era's superstar. You're our star. Because of the news of Lu Zixi's comeback. On the contrary, Bai Weiwei was suppressed, and no one discussed it. Occasionally, a few small fans would weakly say a few words in the vast number of Lu Zixi fans' comments. I think the green tea sister is very cute. Wei Wei Bai saw this comment on her phone and silently liked it. Yes, she also felt that she was very cute. Wei Wei, put on your makeup. We're going to shoot the official photo. The makeup artist ran over. Wei Wei Bai smiled and nodded, then went to put on her makeup. Lu Zishi had something to do today and would be late. So Wei Wei Bai shot first. And Qian had already put on the emperor's clothes. It was a thick black, and he had a crown on his head. His face was a little pale, and his eyes were a little gloomy. It was in line with his status as the last emperor. Lu Zishi got out of the car and hurried over. Because he had taken over Yan Ye's role at the last minute, he could only deal with all the company's matters at once. Only then would he be able to join the crew. As soon as he stepped into the studio, he saw everyone huddled together. A trace of displeasure flashed through Lu Zishi's eyes. Why didn't this crew have any sense of professionalism? He pushed a few people aside and heard a song. Her voice was faintly discernible and sweet. It was so mysterious that it seeped into one's heart. Lu Zishi looked up and saw a petite figure. She was wearing a red tulle dress, a simple and unadorned cyan jade pendant, and thick black hair draped over her shoulders. She stretched out her bare feet, her toes sparkling like jade, and stepped on the big red drum. Her figure was as graceful as the clouds, and her face was as beautiful as a flower. Her soft and beautiful fingers held a bright red peach blossom as she softly sang an ancient tune. In accordance with the photographer's request, she gently revealed a smile that seemed to be joyful, but also had a hurt look in her eyes. It was so breathtaking that people couldn't breathe. The photographer in charge of the shoot smoothly and satisfactorily finished taking the official photo. He said to Wei Wei Bai, "You can end it now." "Very good." His words awakened the people at the scene. Just now, when Wei Wei Bai was dancing in that dress, that magic was simply impossible to break free from. Now, they could finally breathe. Chapter 457. The grief in Wei Wei Bai's eyes disappeared at once. She put away the grief in her body and saw Lu Zishi from afar. She immediately showed a happy smile and jumped down from the drum. Then, barefoot, she dashed over. Lu Zishi only saw that her dress was like a cloud. In the blink of an eye, she threw herself into his arms. "Brother, you're here." Lu Zishi was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Mn, I'm here." His hand couldn't help but grip her arm even harder. Just now, when she was singing and dancing on the drum, it seemed like she would disappear at any moment. This made Lu Zishi feel faintly uneasy. He didn't know where this feeling came from, but it was sudden, as if she would leave at any moment. Wei Wei Bai smiled sweetly and happily. "Brother, it's your turn to take the picture." It was as if she couldn't see the deep emotions in his eyes at all. A few strands of hair fell in front of his eyes. He blinked, suppressing the strange uneasiness in his heart. Then, with an indifferent expression, he nodded and went to change clothes. Lu Zishi's official photo shoot also went smoothly. When it was time to take a group photo, he wore a black robe and silver armor, and held a bow and arrow. In the intersection of shadow and shadow, his handsome features were simply three-dimensional and perfect. The photographer felt that he was an actor in a movie. It really was a perfect picture. He really wanted to lick the camera lens. Wei Wei Bai was still wearing her red dress, standing under the peach blossom forest, while Lu Zishi galloped over on horseback. She raised her head and looked at him with a smile. Lu Zishi's expression should have been more resolute, but when he saw her smile, he couldn't help but smile as well. This scene was directly captured by the photographer. This group photo was even better than the original idea. So the official photo shoot was decided to use this one. After taking the photo, today's work was considered complete. When Lu Zishi finished changing and came out, he saw Wei Wei Bai wearing a white shirt and jeans. She was holding a thermal box and looking around on her tiptoes. His heart, which was cold and empty all year round, was suddenly stuffed with something soft and warm. When Wei Wei Bai saw Lu Zishi, she immediately ran over. Big brother, you should eat something. I just ate. There was rice, 2 dishes, and a soup in the insulated box. They were all warm. Lu Zishi wasn't picky about the simplicity of the meal. He directly picked up the disposable chopsticks and finished the food. He was surrounded by people all year round. But in the end, they were all separated by a layer. He had never experienced such intimate contact from his family. When he was almost done eating, he looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai sitting on a chair. The light shone on her face, and her fair and flawless face had a sweet and innocent look to it. She seemed to have noticed that he was looking at her. She couldn't help but reveal a sweet smile. Lu Zishi didn't know why, but his throat was a little tight. He pretended as if nothing had happened and drank the soup, but it didn't quench his thirst. After observing for a long time, the system finally couldn't help but say, "Host, stop flirting. This is your brother." Wei Wei Bai cupped her face. "Yes, brother, what's with this scary ending sound? And what's with this scary tone of voice?" The system advised earnestly, "I think it's okay to farm 100 affection points." Wei Wei Bai, "I'm farming affection, he he he. What's with this scary old witch's laughter?" Wei Wei Bai, "Can't you see that I'm pure and innocent and don't understand anything?" System. Chapter 458. No, it felt that its host was so black-hearted and rotten that no medicine could save her. The male lead should pray for his own good fortune. After Lu Zishi finished eating, he said to her, "Let's go back." Wei Wei Bai smiled and nodded. Big brother. The word big brother was sweet to the heart. Lu Zishi couldn't help but smile. He put aside his disgust for her and looked at her clearly. He realized that having a little sister wasn't bad. When they left the studio, the road was full of potholes and puddles. It had rained heavily in the afternoon, and they hadn't expected to accumulate so much sewage. Lu Zishi looked at Wei Wei Bai's little white shoes. She seemed to be in a dilemma as she stopped in her tracks. She hesitated for a few seconds before deciding to take a step forward. He suddenly walked in front of her and bent his knees. He turned back and said to her, "Come up, I'll carry you." Wei Wei Bai hesitated, somewhat at a loss. Lu Zishi said indifferently and forcefully, "Come up." Wei Wei Bai smiled somewhat bashfully. Then, she put her hand on his shoulder and pressed her body against his back. The road was very quiet. They had to walk through a long street before they could find a parking space. As she lay on his back, her slender fingers accidentally rubbed against his neck. His muscles tightened, but he didn't say anything and continued to walk. Wei Wei Bai indifferently leaned closer, her breath gently brushing against his ear. This was a sensitive spot. Lu Zishi's footsteps paused. An unbearable numbness appeared in waves from her careless breath. Lu Zishi's ears began to turn red. His jaw tightened, and his lips were tightly pursed. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be careless again. Her head softly rested on his shoulder, and her lips gently kissed the skin of his neck. A faint red color began to appear on his skin. There was a type of person whose body temperature could be seen. That was a man like Lu Zishi, whose skin would turn red when he was excited. Wei Wei Bai silently revealed a mischievous smile. She suddenly whispered, "Big brother, I'm sleepy." Her voice was soft, clingy, and hoarse with a trace of exhaustion. She was pure and innocent, with a seductive charm that seduced people. Lu Zishi's breathing began to grow heavy. His face was red, and his black pupils were frighteningly bright. His breath undulated as he said, "Go to sleep. I'll wake you up when we arrive." Wei Wei Bai nodded sleepily and then closed her eyes quietly, her lips touching his neck. His long hair also fell on his shoulders and touched his cheeks. All of his senses were enveloped by her soft body and sweet fragrance. She did not resist at all. She seemed to completely believe that he was a good brother and would not do anything to her. Lu Zishi didn't even know how he walked through this long street. He felt as if his body was boiling. When he put her in the passenger seat, she was already fast asleep. Lu Zishi fastened her seatbelt. Just as he was about to start the car, he suddenly gasped for breath. His eyes were terrifyingly dark. In the depths of his eyes, there was a kind of dark and unknown heat that was rolling around. Finally, as if he had accepted his fate, he raised his head. He looked back at her and saw that she was leaning against the seat with her head tilted. Her face was fair and delicate, suffused with red. She looked exceptionally delicious. He stared unwaveringly at her pink lips. His fingers gently fell on her lips. His fingertips felt the softness of her lips. She seemed to be somewhat aware, and her lips trembled. He immediately didn't dare to move. Suddenly, her tongue stuck out and licked her lower lip. It also wet and hot licked his fingertips. Chapter 459. Lu Zishi retracted his hand as if he had been electrocuted. He held his breath and didn't dare to move. But she didn't wake up and continued to sleep obediently. Lu Zishi was like a thief, wanting to steal but afraid of being discovered. His mind was a little blank. By the time he realized what he had done, it was already too late to stop himself. His lips gently fell on hers. Her light, soft, and adorable breath intertwined with his heavy, disorderly breathing. Lu Zishi's skin turned even redder. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 50. He kissed her for a few seconds, then immediately released her. Then, he drove home, not daring to look at her again. When he got home, he bent down and carried her out of the car. The housekeeper and the servant came up, intending to take Wei Wei by. Lu Zishi acted as if he couldn't see them. His face was as calm as water as he carried her to his room. Like a gust of wind, his footsteps were particularly hurried. After placing Wei Wei Bai on the bed and covering her with a quilt, Lu Zishi stared at his restless lower body with an ugly expression. The heat in his body couldn't be controlled at all. It was running wild. Wei Wei Bai suddenly groaned. She kicked the quilt away and rolled up her white short-sleeved shirt. Her pure white stomach was exposed. If he looked up, he could see her breasts. Lu Zishi's face darkened. He immediately turned and rushed to the bathroom. Hearing the bathroom door close, Wei Wei Bai lazily opened her eyes and yawned. Tongzi, I'm sleepy. System. If you're sleepy, then sleep. Wei Wei Bai planned to have a heart-to-heart talk before bed. Bored, she asked, Tongzi, do you know what Lu Zishi is doing? System, I don't know, I don't want to see. It's a pure system, different from those flirtatious cheap goods outside. Wei Wei Bai, Tongzi, sibling romance is actually quite hardcore. System, you just realized. Wei Wei Bai, but I like it, hee hee. The system was silent for a long time, then suddenly said, a month has already passed. You only have 5 months left. Wei Wei Bai, question mark. The system replied, that's why you're dying. Wei Wei Bai, huh? The system said, that's why you guys are destined to end up in tragedy. This ending will tell all the kids that according to my law, those who love each other will not end up well. Siblings will give birth to little retards, get struck by lightning, get hit by a car, drown in saliva. Wei Wei Bai, suddenly, he didn't like sibling relationships at all. MDZZ system. Lu Zishi turned on the cold water and splashed his body. His scattered black hair stuck to his sinister face. He looked at himself in the mirror and frowned. His eyes were sharp and had a trace of dark madness. He spent more than an hour soaking in cold water in the bathroom. Finally, he cooled down the redness on his skin. He heaved a sigh of relief, reached for the towel, and wiped his body clean. While Lu Zishi was wiping himself with a towel, he suddenly couldn't take it anymore and fiercely combed his hair back. He said to himself coldly, you're crazy. What are you thinking? She's your sister. Even if he had just acknowledged her. Even if their meeting, was a mistake. How could he let this mistake spread? Did he think that she didn't live a miserable life? She was abused as a child and had a hard time as a teenager. Now that she was finally an adult, she couldn't possibly be remembered by her perverted brother. Let her life be dark and miserable. Yes, pervert. Lu Zishi looked at himself in the mirror and smiled sinisterly. To desire his sister, what was he if not a pervert? Download the mobile article at https://m/sashu.com to facilitate your next reading. You can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 460. Lu Zishi walked out of the bathroom and saw her sleeping on her side. Her beautiful silhouette was faintly discernible under the light. He took a deep breath and then walked out. The housekeeper walked over. "Young master, do you have any orders?" Lu Zishi shook his head. "I'll sleep in the guest room." The housekeeper hesitated and was about to say something. Lu Zishi took a step forward and went to sleep in the guest room. But 2 hours later, in the middle of the night, Lu Zishi returned to his room with 2 dark circles under his eyes and a cold expression on his face. He recognized the bed. The guest room's bed smelled wrong, the quilt was wrong, and the mattress was wrong. Most importantly, he was used to Wei Wei Bai's unique soft fragrance surrounding him. It was like being poisoned. Lu Zishi lay on the bed. She slept on her side and didn't lean over. He crossed his arms behind his head and looked sideways at her slender back. She was still too thin. Although she looked good on camera, she was light in his arms and didn't have the slightest weight. It was healthy to eat more. He looked, and his body began to heat up again. But he couldn't bear to move his body and go to the guest room. It was boiling here, and so was the guest room. But here, Lu Zishi took a deep breath. The bedding was filled with her faint, soft, sweet scent. And the guest room was empty and cold. It was the same insomnia, but he still chose to sleep here. Afraid that he would become a beast, Lu Zishi had to take out his phone to distract himself. He glanced at his friend's circle. There were still people leaving him messages asking to see his sister. He snorted and blacklisted them. In such a short time, he had blacklisted almost half of his friend's circle. Those who dared to covet his sister were all trash. He didn't make friends with trash. After blacklisting a few people, he logged out and went to Weibo. Even though it was late at night, Weibo was still in a frenzy. The first trending topic was the official release of Dreamlike Blossoms. It was unknown how many times more popular it was than the second post. The super director Xiao Yi. The genius film emperor who had made a comeback. And the super popular new star in Qian. They were all trending topic bombs. Under the official account of Dreamlike Blossoms, it was as lively as the new year. Lu Zishi was used to such things. He glanced at the comments on the official Weibo in boredom. At first, it was very normal. Most of them were happy that he was willing to come back and make a movie. But gradually, the comments started to feel weird. Don't you think Qian and Green Tea Sister are a perfect match? They are indeed a good match. I thought that Green Tea Sister didn't have any acting skills, but after looking at the official poster, I feel that she's really good. Lu Zishi scrolled up the page with a dark expression and saw that the latest official photo was of Qian and Wei Wei Bai together. On the huge red drum, Wei Wei Bai was wearing a red dress and white clothes. She was holding a peach blossom in her long and slender fingers. She looked at the emperor below the drum with a sweet smile. And Qian was dressed in a black robe and her hair was combed into a bun. The pale and frail emperor lay beside the drum with deep emotions in her eyes. A huge impact of black, red, and white. It felt like an oil painting. Indeed, they were a match made in heaven. The temperature in Lu Zishi's eyes dropped, and he emitted traces of cold air. He put away his phone and felt the liver fire in his body become more and more exuberant. She suddenly turned over, and her long hair fell softly on his arm. Lu Zixi body stiffened. He felt that she was already within reach. Her soft breaths brushed against his ear. He should push her away. But when his fingers were halfway, her slender and fair calf rested on his lap. The touch of her smooth skin simply made one's mind ripple. Lu Zixi didn't dare to move at all. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 461. No matter how lively the internet was, the filming started as scheduled. Lu Zixi and Wei Bai had a lot of scenes. The plot of Dreamlike Blossoms actually revolved around 3 people. General Yan Yi had thoughts of rebellion and pretended to be the naive and sweet Emperor Chu Xianping, letting Yan Qiqi enter the palace as a concubine. In reality, he just wanted to use Yan Qiqi as a chess piece to control Yan Yi. Yan Qiqi had a crush on her brother Yan Yi. Yan Yi also loved his sister in his heart. The 2 siblings having a crush on each other was a very tense main storyline in the movie. Emperor Chu Xianping was even more tragic. He had already successfully used Yan Qiqi to get rid of Yan Yi. In the end, he fell in love with Yan Qiqi and failed. From Wei Bai's point of view, this movie was simply a melodramatic Mary Sue drama. However, Xiao Yi had the ability to make this kind of melodramatic scene so moving and touching. Wei Bai was bored and chatted with the system. I think the increase in favorability is a bit abnormal. System, it's very normal. Are you doubting my professional statistical skills? Wei Bai, it's not a calculation problem. It's just that I didn't do much and the favorability just increased by itself. This kind of increase was very strange. Ever since she woke up with 55 favorability. Whenever she called her brother, her voice would be sweet. Ding, the favorability would increase by 1 point. Or she would pretend to hold his hand casually. Very good, another ding. She had obtained 1 point of favorability. In just a few days, from Wei Bai's point of view, the favorability had increased by 10 points for nothing. Now, the favorability was at 65. Wei Bai, who was born to work, felt that she had not done anything and the favorability had increased by itself. She was not used to it. The system said calmly, he, it's probably a syscon. Wei Bai then reacted, syscon. Then she slowly revealed a mischievous smile. System, what's with this weird smile? Today's scene was about meeting Chu Xianping. Lu Zixi's scenes were all tomorrow. Xiao Yi thought that Lu Zixi wouldn't come back, but in the end, he saw Uncle Lu wearing sunglasses and sitting in his director's seat. His entire person was indifferent and distant, but he was as handsome as a light bulb. No, he meant. Uncle Lu was so handsome that he looked like he was glowing. No matter how handsome he was, he couldn't sit in his seat, right? Xiao Yi rushed over. Lu Zixi, this is my... Lu Zixi coldly raised his eyes. His sunglasses slid down the bridge of his nose, and a pair of fierce and gloomy eyes gloomily stared at him. He said in an unfriendly tone. Xiao Yi, hello, Mr. Film Emperor, do you want a drink? Come, let me fan you. It's quite hot here. Lu Zixi snorted in satisfaction and lazily leaned back in the director's chair. The miserable Xiao Yi, and Qian walked out in a black emperor's robe. She looked at the director's seat. Why was it Lu Zixi? Although he was neither too big nor too small, he was considered a popular celebrity. Furthermore, he was transforming into an idol powerhouse. But Lu Zixi's identity and status were there for all to see. He was a superstar in the entertainment industry. He didn't dare to provoke him. Wei Bai also walked out. She wore a light cyan dress, and her hair was combed into twin buns and tied with a peach-pink ribbon. Her round almond eyes held a youthful innocence. Like a flower bud that had just bloomed on a branch. Pure and delicate. When Lu Zishi saw her, his gaze softened. He took off his sunglasses and gently said to Wei Wei Bai, "Wei Wei, don't be nervous later. Just act casually, and then we'll go eat Japanese food." Chapter 462. Yes, he'd come today just to take her to eat. And to go shopping. He'd consulted his scoundrel friends, and they'd said that all girls liked this. Wei Wei Bai immediately smiled sweetly. "Okay, big brother." Xiao Yi's face was full of shit. What the hell? What did she mean by casually acting? Hundreds of millions of investment was his, great director Zhao's, signature. Which actor would dare to casually act? He'd whip her to death. Lu Zishi seemed to sense something and looked at Xiao Yi. His gaze turned from soft to icy murderous in less than a second. "Do you have any objections?" Xiao Yi smiled flatteringly. No, how could I dare to have any objections?" Then he turned his head and cried. Was there any justice? He was the director, okay. After the set was ready, they began to shoot the first encounter scene. And Qian quickly got into character. His posture was graceful, and because of the makeup, his face was weak and pale. And Qian's acting skills were still there. His every move was very elegant and noble as he stepped into the peach blossom forest. The scene was Wei Wei Bai falling from a tree into his arms. The tree wasn't tall. Wei Wei Bai sat on a branch and softly sang an ancient tune. She wore light peach embroidered shoes, which gently swayed as she stepped on the flowers. Lu Zishi looked at the camera lens and saw her sweet smile. It was like her nature was acting. She was usually so pure and innocent. Lu Zishi was a little worried about the tragic changes she would have to act out later. Suddenly, she fell from the tree. Without anyone's help, she fell. Lu Zishi suddenly stood up, his heart in his throat. And Qian looked up in surprise and immediately reached out to catch her. It was soft and fragrant, as if he was hugging a ball of glutinous rice cake. Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to reach out and pull down his head. Then she raised her face, and the two of them formed an illusion of kissing. She'd studied this position. On the other side of the camera, the two of them were carelessly kissing. But in reality, the two of them hadn't touched each other. Lu Zishi's eyes abruptly sank, and he stared at them with a frighteningly dark gaze. His fingers gripped the armrest of the chair fiercely as his anger boiled up. They did not stop acting because of this accident. And Qian didn't realize that the two of them seemed to be kissing. Instead, he went along with the plot and teased, "Where did this little girl come from? She can't wait to fly into my arms." Wei Wei Bai also took the opportunity to move away, revealing her extremely bashful face. Her watery eyes glistened with curiosity. She looked at him with fear and shyness. "Put me down." And Qian laughed out loud. "No, you fell into my arms on your own accord, so you're mine." Wei Wei Bai was anxious. With a red face, she reached out her fist and lightly punched him. "Who's you? You have such a big face. Put me down." Wait a minute, was there such a bashful scene in the script? And Qian was also addicted to acting. He displayed the temperament of a profligate son to the extreme. He immediately reached out and lifted her chin. "This world is Zhen's, and so are you." At these words, Wei Wei Bai's face appropriately paled. She pushed him away, turned around, and ran. But because her skirt was too long, she stepped on it and fell into Qian's arms. The two of them rolled into a ball. And Qian groaned. He knew that this accident would probably cut it. So, he didn't continue acting. Instead, he sincerely joked, "You're so heavy. Do you want to crush me to death so that you can inherit my position as a superstar?" Wei Wei Bai lay on his chest, lifted her slightly red face, and laughed happily. "Yeah, how did you know?" Chapter 463. The system couldn't help but remind the host, look at the male lead's face, it's dark. Wei Bai, for a brother with a sister complex, his sister falling in love is the biggest blow. It's also the best way to force him to increase his favorability. System, falling in love? Wei Bai smiled but didn't say anything. Then she smiled at Enchanting even more adorably. This pair was young, laughing and fooling around. They were simply invincible. Xiao Yi couldn't help but say, this pair really looks like a match made in heaven. It's good to be young. It's really pleasing to the eye. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. He looked up and saw Lu Zixi with drooping eyes and a dark face, coldly looking at the pair of young people flirting in front of him. Xiao Yi was the only one in the crew who knew that Wei Bai was his sister. He thought that Lu Zixi was worried that his sister would be taken advantage of. He immediately said earnestly, I think Enchanting has a bright future ahead of him. It's not a bad idea to give your sister to him. Just as he finished speaking, Lu Zixi abruptly stood up. With a kick of his foot, he flipped the chair over. His eyes carried traces of viciousness, and everyone present felt a chill run down their backs. Lu Zixi's eyes were gloomy as he said coldly, what are you making a fuss about? There are so many people in the crew waiting for you to mess around, right? And Qian immediately stood up and reached out to hold Wei Bai's hand. Lu Zixi's gaze was like a knife as he stared at his sister's hand. And Qian didn't know why, but his hand automatically retracted. It felt like Lu Zixi's gaze was about to eat him. Lu Zixi suddenly laughed coldly. This plot needs to be changed. The meeting between Chu Xianping and Yan Qiqi is too undignified. It doesn't fit the style of the movie. Xiao Yi, what? Lu Zixi, the person playing Chu Xianping, stand 3 meters away. And Qian didn't dare to resist. After all, Lu Zixi was the movie emperor and his boss. He couldn't afford to provoke him. He could only obediently stand 3 meters away. Wei Bai was a little nervous and looked at Lu Zixi with some fear. Lu Zixi saw the fear in her eyes and clenched his fists. She was laughing and joking with Enchanting, that pretty boy. She was scared whenever she saw her brother. His voice turned cold. You are standing under the peach blossoms. Wei Bai took a few steps back, glanced at him timidly, and then turned to look at Enchanting. Enchanting immediately gave her a reassuring smile. Who hadn't been reprimanded by the director before? She was still a newbie and needed encouragement. Wei Bai immediately showed a friendly smile. Flirting with each other. This was practically digging Lu Zixi's heart. He held his breath and said, just act like this. How was he supposed to act like this? Flirting through air. Lu Zixi's voice was cold. What, you can't act? I really don't know how you got into the cast. He lashed out at Enchanting. Enchanting didn't say anything, but Wei Bai couldn't help but purse her lips as her eyes reddened. Lu Zixi's bellyful of words died in his stomach, stifling his face even darker. He wanted to comfort her. But when he thought of how she had smiled so gently and adorably at Enchanting just now, he couldn't help but feel a little jealous. His heart was sour and bitter, and he couldn't even squeeze out a smile. Continue acting. It was a good plot of an emperor teasing a little white rabbit. It turned into an emperor looking deeply at the little white rabbit. Then the two people stared at each other without even a line. But Lu Zixi still found it dazzling. They were of the same age, and they were both handsome and beautiful. He watched from afar and also felt that they were a good match. The first day of the play ended in a muddle. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 464. Wei Bai removed her makeup and changed her clothes. Just as she came out, she saw the exhausted Enchanting also come out. The two of them empathized with each other and couldn't help but smile at each other. The young man and woman were fresh and beautiful. Lu Zishi looked up and saw their smiles. He lowered his eyelids, his eyes full of gloomy coldness. He was expressionless until Wei Wei Bai walked in front of him. Brother. Lu Zishi looked at her deeply, then suddenly reached out and grabbed her arm. He pulled her forward and quickly dragged her to the garage. Wei Wei Bai stumbled after him. To keep up with his pace, she could only start running. She gasped and said, "Brother, slow down. I can't keep up." While her breath was unstable, her sweet and soft voice carried a husky charm. It was simply seductive. Lu Zishi's pace suddenly slowed, and his back was terrifyingly tense. After getting in the car, he calmly fastened her seatbelt for her. The car sped out. The air was stagnant, and it felt like it was impossible to breathe. The system didn't dare to breathe loudly. "I feel like the male lead has been played to the point of breaking by you." The host kept rubbing against other men. She even deliberately faked kisses and deliberately smiled at other men. Was she trying to stir up trouble, or something big? Wei Wei Bai stroked the system's well-behaved cat head. "Tongzi, you don't understand. It's impossible to get a affection value of 100. But to get a affection value of 100, you have to make Lu Zishi admit that even if I'm his sister, he'll still be moved like a beast and give up everything to only want me." System. Actually, you can pounce on him and take the initiative to climb into his bed or something. You can get 100 too. Wei Wei Bai, Tongzi, you've fallen. The system slowly took out a piece of black chocolate and began to gnaw on it. "Yeah, I've been eating too many black things lately. My heart has turned black too. Wei Wei Bai, if you pounce on him now, you'll still be dissatisfied. You can only force him to admit his feelings." Wei Wei Bai was already an old hand after scrolling through so many worlds. She was very familiar with the rules of emotional value. After returning home, Lu Zishi finally managed to suppress the anger in his heart. He didn't dare to look at Wei Wei Bai, worried that he would do something that he would regret. "You go rest first, I'll leave for a while." With that, he hurriedly walked away. Wei Wei Bai calmly went to take a bath. After she was done, she laid on the bed smelling good. She put the script aside and started scrolling through her phone calmly. Lu Zishi smoked a few cigarettes outside. He had to calm down. Today, he had completely lost control. If he hadn't held it in, he would have died. When Wei Wei Bai kissed in Qian, he had probably picked up a chair and smashed in Qian to death. Violent madness surged within his body. Lu Zishi's hand trembled as he held the cigarette. He coldly said to himself, "She's your little sister. Don't let your delusions continue." It was a mistake at first. He couldn't be wrong all his life. He carried a lot of burdens on his shoulders. If he let his feelings go, he would definitely not be able to deal with them in the end. Most importantly, he would destroy her. When Lu Zishi returned to the room, he saw Wei Wei Bai lying on the bed. Under the light, she wore conservative pajamas. Only her white and tender neck was exposed. Her long black hair was scattered on the bed. She absent-mindedly rested her face in her hands and stared at the book with a smile. He didn't know what she was looking at. Lu Zishi couldn't move his feet. "This is your little sister, your little sister." It was like chanting the great compassion mantra. After repeating it hundreds of times, he finally calmed down. Chapter 465. Lu Zishi sneered, "What, you want to push me to another woman? Wei Wei Bai has really grown up and knows how to find a woman for her brother." She didn't like him. So she pushed him to someone else. Wei Wei Bai panicked, Can I leave? Are you afraid that I'll steal your property? I shouldn't have come back. I shouldn't have come to take a share of your money." She was so pitiful. So helpless. It was as if she couldn't bear her brother's filthy desires for her. So she desperately tried to find a reason to deny that he had done such beastly things to her. Lu Zishi looked at her expressionlessly with a trace of pity in his eyes. It seemed that all her struggles were in vain. I'll have someone make a fake paternity test and say that you're not my sister. Wei Wei Bai said in disbelief. What? Lu Zishi repeated softly, I've already announced it on my WeChat moments and posted the fake paternity test results. You're not my sister. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. She was truly shocked. Were fake paternity tests as common as cabbages? Everyone had one. Her eyes reddened. I know, I'm not your sister. I'll move out immediately and stay far away from you. Lu Zishi looked at her indifferently. Wei Wei Bai was a bit embarrassed. If you didn't recognize me, you would have driven me away long ago, not using this method. Lu Zishi suddenly sneered. He carelessly reached out and probed under the quilt. His fingertips pressed on her skin little by little. It was ambiguous and carried a strong sense of possessiveness. Wei Wei Bai's face paled little by little. She didn't dare to move at all, as if recalling last night's events. Lu Zishi's other hand gently stroked her face. Be good, don't make me angry. When I have a family meeting, I'll take out the paternity test and let everyone know that you're not my sister. Then, he smiled ambiguously. You'll know when the time comes. Wei Wei Bai, you'll be struck by lightning halfway through your sentence. Lu Zishi didn't make things difficult for her, as if he was afraid that she wouldn't be able to bear it and would collapse. After a few days of rest, Wei Wei Bai was finally able to return to the set. Although Lu Zishi hadn't done anything civilized or harmonious to her. However, there was no lack of touching and hugging. Occasionally, there would be wild kisses. What was strange was that even though he had kissed her enough, her favorability did not increase. Wei Wei Bai felt that the initial increase was too smooth. Once Lu Zishi felt that he had succeeded, the favorability wouldn't increase. What was the difference between eating a scumbag and not increasing his favorability? After filming the solo scenes, Xiao Yi even specially looked for Wei Wei Bai for a chat. I watched the scene between you and Enqian. You're a little reserved. You need to be more intimate. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she glanced at the silent Lu Zishi in the director's chair with some fear. Lu Zishi wore sunglasses and looked at her from the side. His thin lips curved slightly, revealing a cold smile. Wei Wei Bai trembled and lowered her head, not daring to make a sound. Xiao Yi thought that he had scared her. Don't be afraid. It's normal for newcomers to be reserved. Lu Zishi's girl was soft and weak. Xiao Yi was afraid that he would scare her to death. After the chat, Wei Wei Bai suddenly received a text message. It was from Bai Ziwen. Wei Wei Bai rubbed her chin. Tongzi, I think that Lu Zishi can't be spoiled. He needs to feel a sense of crisis to increase his favorability. Lu Zishi, to put it bluntly, was a bit of a pervert. A relationship that was too smooth had instead caused him to be unperturbed. She had to stir up trouble to increase his favorability. The system advised, just struggle a bit, then casually say that you love him. That's all. Don't mess around. Wei Wei Bai, so casual. Okay, I'll struggle a bit. Because Lu Zishi had a scene, he went to put on makeup. Wei Wei Bai counted the time. Then, just as he came out, she turned around and stealthily left. When she left, he happened to see her. Lu Zishi's footsteps paused and he suddenly said, "Stop filming for now." Then he followed her. Meanwhile, Bai Ziwen anxiously paced back and forth in the public restroom. She didn't know why, but those loan sharks were always able to find her. Wei Wei Bai was her last bargaining chip. Suddenly, the restroom door opened. Wei Wei Bai stood in the doorway. Bai Ziwen was just about to say something when Wei Wei Bai's tears streamed down her face. Mom, are you here to take me away? Bai Ziwen, who wanted to borrow money, ? Lu Zishi, who had followed her, paused in his footsteps, his expression gloomy. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 466. Wei Wei Bai walked up to her and looked at her pitifully. Tears streamed down her face. Mom, I was wrong. I don't want to acknowledge my brother anymore. Please take me away from here. The moment Bai Ziwen heard that, her face changed. No, if you don't acknowledge your brother, how are you going to live your life in the future? Look at you. You can immediately get Director Xiao to act after acknowledging him. Could you do that in the past? And most importantly, as long as she entered the Lu family, she would have money. She could only repay her debts with money. If she did not repay her debts, the loan sharks and casinos would drag her to sell her body. Other than asking for money, Bai Ziwen was also here to denounce her. She had yet to get her revenge for the beating that Wei Wei Bai had given her previously. But after being interrupted by Wei Wei Bai, she could not even remember that incident. Debt was the most important thing. Wei Wei Bai bit down on her lips with a pitiful look. But he said that he doesn't acknowledge me anymore. Bai Ziwen was furious. Why are you so useless? Do you know who your brother is? He's Lu Zishi, the CEO of Tian Na Corporation. As long as he gives you some benefits, you'll be rich for the rest of your life. Why can't you tell good from bad? If not for the fact that she had to rely on Wei Wei Bai to return to the family to repay her debts, Bai Ziwen even had the heart to beat her to death. Wei Wei Bai's face was pale as she looked at her in despair. That sorrowful look made Bai Ziwen feel a little uncomfortable. Why? I want you to acknowledge your brother, not sell your body. Wei Wei Bai let out a sorrowful expression. She wanted to say something, but nothing came out. She could only say helplessly, he doesn't acknowledge me. He doesn't acknowledge me as his sister. So, let's hurry and leave, Mummy. When Bai Ziwen heard that, her expression turned sinister. How can he not acknowledge you? You're a child of the Lu family. If he doesn't acknowledge you, it must be your fault. Wei Wei Bai opened her mouth a few times, but she did not dare to say anything. In the end, he could only say helplessly, Mom, can we not be rich? I'll work hard to earn money and I'll support you. Bai Ziwen was impatient. She lit a cigarette and said fiercely, raise me? How are you going to support me? I've asked you to sleep with the director a few times, but you only know how to run away. Now that you've become so bold, you don't want to acknowledge your brother and even want to disobey your mother. I think you've eaten a bear's heart and leopard's guts. Are you asking for a beating? Wei Wei Bai's pitiful appearance made her feel that she could control this good-for-nothing daughter. His confidence was greatly boosted. Wei Wei Bai was suddenly pushed to the limit and shouted angrily, you don't even know what disgusting things I've experienced. How can you force me like this? The cigarette in Bai Ziwen's hand trembled. She was also burning with anxiety. What kind of disgusting things could you have experienced? It can't be that Lu Zishi also forced you to sell yourself, right? I'll tell you the truth. I now owe 10 million in debt. If you don't recognize your brother, how will you repay the debt? Wei Wei Bai couldn't believe it. 10 million. Bai Ziwen sneered. If you don't have a way to get 10 million from Lu Zishi, I'll sell you. After a few more sales, I'm sure you'll have enough money. Wei Wei Bai was so delicate and beautiful. She was still a virgin. There was no need to worry about not being able to sell her for a good price. Wei Wei Bai knocked on the system expressionlessly. This is the first time I've seen such a shameless mother. I really want to beat her to death. System, I want to beat her to death too. This kind of mother shouldn't try to scam a stepmother. There are also good stepmothers, and there are also great mothers. Wei Wei Bai silently agreed. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com button at the bottom to record this reading record. Chapter 467. Lu Zishi stood outside the bathroom door. He leaned against the wall, a cigarette between his fingers. When he heard that she was leaving, she clearly knew that Bai Ziwen would beat her and sell her, but she would rather go with Bai Ziwen. Her heart turned cold. Did she hate him that much? So much so that she would rather be with Bai Ziwen, the woman who abused her. She still wanted to run away from him. Lu Zishi's brows were grave and stern. The chill in his eyes could materialize. Bai Ziwen was still forcing her. If you don't have 10 million, you won't recognize your brother. Go sell yourself. When Lu Zishi heard these words, he felt distressed, but malice couldn't help but surge up. Wei Wei, look, this is your mother. Are you desperate for this world? He had wanted to take her away from the start, so that she couldn't escape. But now, Bai Ziwen was forcing her even more unbearably. Then she would know that she couldn't go anywhere. Her brother was a bad person. Her mother was an even bigger bad person. This was the only way to shatter her hopes of escape. What a pitiful child. Bai Ziwen was still forcing her step by step, coldly saying a bunch of words about selling herself. Wei Wei Bai was daydreaming. Tongzi, Lu Zishi is next to you, right? The system turned to look. Ah, he is. Wei Wei Bai, what is he doing? Seeing me so miserable, is he very sympathetic? Once she sympathized with him, her favorability would increase. The system was silent for a long time before shattering her delusion. No, he's smiling quite happily. For the first time, Wei Wei Bai suspected ginseng. Her mother was a bad person, and her brother was a pervert. She was so miserable. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but cry. Tongzi, I feel like I'm the loneliest and most beautiful flower in this world. Why do they all have to force me to sob? System, blurg, Wei Wei Bai cried even more happily. It was better to be disgusted than to be disgusted by a crowd. Tiny, pitiful sniffles could be heard. Lu Zishi lowered his head. Under the shadows, his cold, hard face became even more sinister. The cigarette in his hand trembled, and the ashes fell to the ground. When Bai Ziwen saw Wei Wei Bai crying, she sneered, "Who do you think you are? If it wasn't for me, you would have starved to death. To tell you the truth, I came here today for money." Wei Wei Bai's face was full of tears. She looked at her blankly. What if I don't go back and acknowledge my brother? Bai Ziwen snorted coldly, I'll sell you. Any old man will do as long as he pays 10 million. Wei Wei Bai's face was filled with grief, and her eyes became hollow. She sobbed and said to the system, how could my mother do this to me? System, you're too immersed in your role. You look so pitiful. It was just about to comfort him. Wei Wei Bai said, I'm worth at least 100 billion. I'm so unique and beautiful, 10 million is too little. Scram. Bai Ziwen's phone suddenly rang. Her expression changed, but she had no choice but to answer it. They were debt collectors. I said, I'll pay you back soon. Her tone became humble. Yes. Really? My daughter is a small celebrity. She's very pretty. She's just a green tea sister, you know. Oh, your boss likes green tea sisters. 5 million. That's too little. At least 8 million. Okay, 5 million it is. I'll take her there later, Bai Ziwen said with a smile. She hung up the phone. She had already changed her mind. For someone like Lu Zishi, if he said he wouldn't acknowledge his sister, he really would. If she wanted to get 10 million from Lu Zishi, it would be better to sell Wei Wei Bai. It was more practical. After hanging up the phone, Bai Ziwen immediately reached out and grabbed Wei Wei Bai. Come with mommy. Mommy will take you to a good place. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here, / transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Download Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here, Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here, comma. Chapter 468. Wei Wei Bai looked at her blankly, then suddenly reacted. Are you going to sell me? Bai Ziwen was too lazy to pretend to be kind. 5 million can help pay off half of Mom's debt. Otherwise, Mom will die. Do you want me to die? Wei Wei Bai, very willing. I'm overjoyed. I'm in high spirits. I clap my hands in joy. Bai Ziwen said, I know that you still love your mother dearly. Listen to your mother and save her. Wei Wei Bai, no, I can't continue acting. I really want to hack her to death. I can't let this kind of person sully the title of Great Mother. She asked the system, how about we hack her to death? The system nodded in agreement. I'll provide you with a kitchen knife for free. Wei Wei Bai was still thinking about how to hack Bai Ziwen to death without anyone noticing. Outside the door, Lu Zishi couldn't take it anymore. How could this slut ruin his sister like this? With a fierce flick of his hand, he threw out the cigarette and strode into the bathroom. Her back was thin and lonely. Her long hair hung down as she stood there foolishly. She didn't know how to run away even after being hurt. It was really distressing. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 76. It increased by 1. Sympathy points. Wei Wei Bai, what's wrong with the favorability? It was clearly very easy to increase, so why isn't it increasing? She didn't have time to think about the reason. Suddenly, a hand appeared on her shoulder. It was a familiar aura, unique to Lu Zishi. His fingers carelessly smoothed out her long, disheveled hair. His other hand, however, was hugging her waist. His entire body pressed against her from behind, trapping her tightly in his embrace. Anyone who saw this posture would find it ambiguous. Wei Wei Bai didn't dare to move. She seemed to be scared stiff. Lu Zishi could even feel her body trembling. She seemed to want to escape, but she didn't have the strength to struggle. Cute and soft. But she didn't have the slightest strength to resist. When Bai Ziwen saw Lu Zishi appear, her crying face stiffened. She suddenly didn't dare to say anything. Lu Zishi's eyes were gloomy, but his voice contained traces of indifference. You only need to pay 10 million to buy her. Bai Ziwen laughed awkwardly. No, I was just joking. Lu Zishi's dark eyes made Bai Ziwen's hair stand on end. However, he suddenly laughed. It was so cold that it made people tremble. Why don't you sell it to me? How about 15 million at once? The 10 million renminbi gambling debt was repaid. And 5 million for living expenses. That was enough to last for a while. Bai Ziwen's eyes lit up, but she hesitated. Are you going to acknowledge Wei Wei? Lu Zishi didn't say anything. His attention was on Wei Wei Bai. Her warm and soft body trembled in his arms. He seemed to have been driven to the brink of collapse by them. Lu Zishi's eyes darkened, and he coldly lifted his eyelids. Are you selling? Bai Ziwen felt a chill run down her back. Dealing with people like Lu Zishi, she didn't even know when she would die. The fact that Wei Wei Bai was not her biological daughter. Sooner or later, she would find out. Before that, she would grab the money and immediately run away. When that time came, the person who would be found dead would be Wei Wei Bai. Bai Ziwen immediately said, okay, I'll sell it to you. As soon as these words came out, Wei Wei Bai couldn't stand still. Her whole body softened and she collapsed. Lu Zishi's fingers tightened, locking her completely in his arms. He calmly said, go out and find my assistant. He will give you the money. Bai Ziwen had a guilty conscience and immediately ran away. It was fine as long as she could get the money. She didn't care about Wei Wei Bai's life or death. Lu Zishi sneered. She took his money and still had delusions about living a good life? Chapter 469. Lu Zishi guided her bit by bit. You have no place to go, Wei Wei. I'm your brother. In this world, only I can protect you. A trace of struggle appeared in Wei Wei Bai's eyes. You shouldn't do such a thing to me. Lu Zishi asked faintly, why can't I do it? Wei Wei Bai said in a panic, we're brother and sister. Lu Zishi suddenly laughed. Brother and sister? Who admitted it? Who knows you're my sister? Once he posted the fake report, it was all over. Who in his circle of friends would doubt it? Whether it was real or fake, he could settle it with a single sentence, couldn't he? Wei Wei Bai came back to her senses. The despair in her eyes was clear. Lu Zishi crushed her hope of escape bit by bit. I don't need a sister, Wei Wei. These words completely shattered the light in her eyes. He gently reached out and delicately stroked her tender face with his fingertips. Look, your mother doesn't need a daughter, and your brother doesn't need a sister. What else do you have? Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly. His handsome face revealed a devilish smile. So just be with me. We won't be brother and sister. Let's be lovers, okay? Wei Wei Bai's eyes were half closed. They were filled with confusion. Her moist, bright red lips suddenly opened and closed. Okay. Lu Zishi was still racking his brains on how to hypnotize her and make her agree to him. Lovers are much more reliable than brother and sister. We'll fall in love, get married, and be together for the rest of our lives. Okay. Lu Zishi finally reacted. He was stunned. What did you say? Wei Wei Bai looked up and pursed her slightly swollen lips. Her eyes flickered, and her tone was somewhat perfunctory as she repeated, okay, let's be lovers. Immense ecstasy surrounded Lu Zishi without warning. He couldn't even react for a moment. He could only stare blankly at her. He could see that she was still unwilling. He could also see that she was retreating and running away. She might even be lying to him and thinking about how to escape. But at this moment, when she said yes, he truly felt a great sense of joy. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. Wei Wei Bai, finally. Lu Zishi's fingers tightened as he held her chin. He couldn't help but want to kiss her. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and tried to avoid it. Lu Zishi paused and said helplessly, I won't force you. Let's take it slow. Becoming a freak wasn't something that could be cultivated in a day. Lu Zishi also understood this principle. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said hesitantly, brother, we don't want. Lu Zishi listened carefully. Only then did he hear her mutter softly, can we not do what we did last night? Lu Zishi's face turned cold. Was she only agreeing because she wanted to avoid him? He smiled indifferently. Okay, I won't do it for now. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 75. 5 points down. Wei Wei Bai's mind exploded. What did I do wrong? I didn't do anything. I don't want to see civilized, dedicated, and fair bullet screen. Am I wrong? After this torment, Wei Wei Bai rested for 2 days before barely getting up. It was mainly because of Xiao Yi's phone bombardment that she had no choice but to get up. Because of Lu Zishi, the crew had repeatedly stopped filming, which had already made director Xiao explode. He roared, if you don't come on set, I'll hang myself in front of Tian Na. I won't let you go even if I die. Lu Zishi, hee, you're hanging. Wei Wei Bai, I'll go, right away. These 2 days, Lu Zishi used his strength to explain what it meant to be a psychopath. The favorability went up and down. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here, / transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Download Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here to read on mobile. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 470. She didn't do anything, but this guy's face was black one moment and smiling the next. His favorability would drop one moment and rise the next. Wei Wei Bai expressed that her heart was tired. She just wanted to be a little white flower that casually cried to gain favorability. Why was it so hard? So, she should be cold for a while and then increase his favorability. She couldn't afford to provoke her crazy brother. Wei Wei Bai was going to film, so of course Lu Zixi had to follow. The individual scenes for dreamlike blossoms were more or less done. Next was the scene of Shiraba. Oh, no, the group scenes. This scene was when Chu Xianping, played by An Qian, discovered that Yan Qiqi and Yan Yi were having an affair. The so-called affair was Yan Qiqi soaking in a bath. Then she called her brother over, intending to devote herself to him. Could it be more melodramatic? If it weren't for the high-end atmosphere of this drama, she would have thought that she was filming an 18th-rate melodramatic drama. She was going to film a bath scene. Lu Zixi's face darkened and he immediately ordered people to clear the scene. Xiao Yi sat in the assistant director's seat, feeling hopeless. Was he a director? No, he was a transparent background. After clearing the scene, Wei Wei Bai entered the bath in her swimsuit. As long as her shoulders were exposed, she would be completely naked. Xiao Yi said to Wei Wei Bai, "Wei Wei, you have to show obvious love later, understand?" He also knew that Wei Wei Bai wasn't Lu Zixi's biological sister. So, he wasn't as cautious as he was at the beginning. Wei Wei Bai nodded. It was too simple. Wasn't it just showing an affectionate expression? She had at least a dozen different affectionate expressions that she could use together, making her expressions richer and more interesting. Lu Zixi stood by the bath. He was also a film emperor. He got into character as soon as he said so. A trace of surprise appeared on his face, but more than that, he didn't approve. Wei Wei? Wei Wei Bai soaked in the bath, her back facing Lu Zixi. Her long black hair was wet and draped over her shoulders. Her collarbone was slender and beautiful. She had only put on a light waterproof makeup, and her lips were slightly red. She turned her head with a slight frown on her face. Her lips were slightly red. She softly smiled. Her eyes were like falling stars, so beautiful that it shook one to the core. Big brother. Her voice was sweet and tender, filled with deep sorrow. Lu Zixi's mind went blank. His heart was in chaos. His thoughts were also in a mess because of her. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. Wei Wei Bai expressed that she wasn't surprised at all. She even wanted to throw a system at Lu Zixi to crush him to death. Anyway, if the favorability increased, it would also decrease. Ha ha ha. Because it was an act, she went all out. She reached out and held onto the side of the bathtub. She reached out her soft and fair wrist and hugged his leg. Her pure and exquisite face carried a charm that could cause the downfall of a country. Am I beautiful? Lu Zixi's breathing stopped. She had always been afraid of him. This was the first time he saw this side of her. It was simply. He should hold her tightly in his hands and not let anyone look at her. Wei Wei Bai was addicted to acting. Her eyes reddened. Why won't you look at me? I like you. Lu Zixi then remembered his lines. He closed his eyes. Don't talk nonsense. He would take it seriously. Wei Wei Bai smiled. The tears in her eyes slid down her cheeks. She looked at him sorrowfully. I like you. I like you very much. I'm not a child. I know that my feelings for you aren't that of an older brother, but of a man. These words were filled with sincerity. There wasn't a trace of acting. It was more like an expression of her true feelings. Lu Zixi opened his eyes. A trace of confusion flashed through his dark pupils. He stared blankly into her eyes. Was her acting that good? Chapter 471. She didn't seem to expect him to open his eyes. There was no time to hide the complex feelings in her eyes. She suddenly released him and awkwardly bowed her head, her body trembling violently. Lu Zishi suddenly realized something and jumped into the bath. He reached out and grabbed her, pinching her chin. You like me? She shouldn't hate him. Should she avoid him like a snake or scorpion? Lu Zishi knew his own morbid thoughts, and he never expected her to accept it. But were the feelings she just revealed real? Wei Wei Bai's face was crooked from his pinch. She was just acting. She hadn't even used 30% of her strength. What was wrong with this big brother snake? She didn't protest. Xiao Yi was already roaring, "Fuck you, Mr. Movie Emperor, what are you doing? You're blowing up the scene. Are you sleepwalking? If you don't want to act, then scram." Lu Zishi saw the fear in her eyes again. His heart sank, and his eyes turned cold. He looked at the bristling Xiao Yi. What did you say? Xiao Yi's angry face stiffened. Roll, 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 Mr. Movie Emperor, you're awesome. Lu Zishi felt his heart full of hope turn to nothing. He stared at her, but there wasn't a trace of affection in her eyes. It was still the fear of cowering. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and hesitated. Brother, are we still filming? Lu Zishi suddenly became angry. Don't call me brother again. Wei Wei Bai's face paled, and she didn't dare to say another word. Lu Zishi's heart ached. He knew he had lost control. He released her and said in a gentle voice, "Continue filming." They entered the zone and quickly finished filming the scene. The miserable one was Enqian. In this scene, Enqian was standing behind the beaded curtain, watching the siblings' affectionate confession in shock. In the end, the sibling passed without any NGs. He got dressed and faced the empty bath. The director let him act like this. Enqian was immediately dumbfounded. This was too much of a training for acting. Why didn't they wait for him to act? This was against the rules. After Wei Wei Bai was taken home by Lu Zishi, he disappeared again. Because there were still more than 3 months left, Wei Wei Bai was not in a hurry. When dealing with lunatics, one had to take their time. Otherwise, if one were to brush up on their favorability, who knew if it would return to zero when they woke up? After taking a shower, she put on her teddy bear pajamas and was about to go to bed. Lu Zishi reeked of alcohol once again. Wei Wei Bai didn't have any makeup on, and her fair skin was so tender that people wanted to lick it. She was wearing cartoon pajamas and a hairband. She looked very young and childish. She seemed to be surprised by his sudden appearance. Her almond-shaped eyes widened slightly, and she was somewhat at a loss. Lu Zishi chuckled, indescribably self-deprecating. With a mocking smile on his face, he staggered forward and reached out to pull her into his arms. Soft and light. For Lu Zishi, it was very simple to hold her and not let her escape. Wei Wei, come with me to a place. After Lu Zishi finished speaking, he stuffed the stupefied Wei Wei Bai back into the car. Then, the car sped away. The speed was 200. And drunk driving. This made Wei Wei Bai not dare to make a sound. She was afraid that if she said one more word, she would get into an accident. Lu Zishi raced to the cemetery. When Wei Wei Bai saw the cemetery, her legs went soft. She was afraid that the ghosts in the graves would crawl out in the next second. Lu Zishi said, "Today is the anniversary of my mother's death." Wei Wei Bai, she suddenly remembered. Wasn't it because of Bai Ziwen that Lu Zishi's mother committed suicide by jumping off a building? To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 472. Lu Zishi dragged Wei Wei Bai to his mother's grave. On the tombstone, there was a picture of a beautiful woman in the middle. No matter how beautiful it was also very gloomy. Lu Zixi's voice was somewhat dazed. At that time, my mother's depression was already very serious. Bai Ziwen knew that she was in the final stages of depression, so she deliberately brought you here to provoke her. That was the first time he saw Wei Wei Bai. Too much time had passed, and only hatred kept him alive. The first time they met, he couldn't remember clearly. Wei Wei Bai Ziwen really wasn't kind. She was deliberately forcing Lu Zixi's mother to her death. Lu Zixi suddenly sneered at himself. How much I hate you, Wei Wei Bai. At that time, he had just woken up in the hospital. Except for hating Bai Ziwen. It was Wei Wei Bai. If it weren't for her existence, his mother would have held on no matter how desperate she was. But she had an illegitimate child, a stain that could no longer be erased. It completely crushed that woman who pursued perfection in all things. Lu Zixi felt her hand gripping his fingers tightly, as if she was afraid. His heart immediately softened. Why was he scaring her? In the end, she was innocent. And because of his negligence, she had been abused as a child. She didn't have a single good day. Sometimes, he wondered if he was crazy. How could he do such a thing to her? Her mother abused her. But he molested her. In this way, he was no different from Bai Ziwen. They were both scum. Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't help but knock on the system. Can I collapse my character setting? Forget about being a little white flower, I'll just throw myself at him and say I love you, brother. Otherwise, the favorability will keep going up and down. It's a waste of time. System, where's your rich character setting? Wei Wei Bai, didn't you see Lu Zixi take me to the cemetery to reminisce about the past? If I continue to be rich, what if he gets hot-headed and wants to kill me for revenge? Psychopaths couldn't be guessed. And in the cemetery in the middle of the night, she had a psychological shadow. The system quietly nibbled on its chocolate. Yes, yes. Good luck. Bai Weiwei got the system's encouragement, fog, and her confidence increased greatly. Just as she was about to pounce on him and say that she loved him too, Lu Zixi faintly sighed. Forget it. Let's go. Then, he carried the confused Wei Wei Bai back into the car. Wei Wei Bai helplessly rubbed her face. This Lu Zixi's mobility was too strong. He came and went without a transition. Lu Zixi started the car and drove out. Suddenly, he noticed that she had turned sideways and was looking out the window. The shadow of the lonely headlights was cast on the side of her face. Her long black hair was draped over her back, soft and smooth. Deep sadness appeared on her face, and her voice was somewhat suppressed. I'm sorry, I didn't know that my mother had done such a thing. Lu Zixi fell silent. He could not bring himself to say that it was not his fault. She repeated softly, I'm sorry. It's only right that you hate me. Lu Zixi's heart was both bitter and sweet. He did not hate her. But when he saw that she blamed herself for this matter and began to soften towards him, he couldn't help but secretly rejoice. Wei Wei Bai consciously laid the groundwork for a while. Now, she should be able to try to fabricate, try to confess. After all, mutual liking was the easiest strategy. She relaxed her throat, and her face reddened for a moment. Then, her voice was soft and slightly hoarse. Actually, I have someone I like. Chapter 473. Lu Zixi's fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly. Do you have someone you like? He looked at her and found that her face was tender and beautiful, her eyes were clear and bright, and the corners of her mouth were curved in a smile. Yes, the first time I saw him, I knew I liked him. Lu Zixi felt as if he had fallen into an abyss. He forced a smile. Is that so? How much do you like him? Bai Weiwei's expression softened and became affectionate, it should be love at first sight. At that time, I thought, if I could marry him, live an ordinary life with him, and live a quiet and happy life, that would be good. Lu Zixi vision darkened. Is that so? Then why aren't you with him? Wei Wei Bai was silent, her eyes filled with loneliness. I also want to be with him, but I'm afraid that I'll ruin him. At first, she didn't know it was her brother. Then it was her brother, so she could only desperately suppress her love. Her tone was light, but it hid a helpless sadness. Lu Zixi suddenly remembered that he had detained her. And the person she liked should be an ordinary person. Was she afraid that he would find out and take revenge? His chest felt like it was about to burst. He tried to suppress his crazy jealousy. But suddenly, he heard her soft and gentle voice. But today, I finally understood that instead of letting us both struggle in pain, it's better to do everything we can to be together. Lu Zixi suddenly said coldly, enough, I don't want to hear it. Wei Wei Bai said sadly, brother, the person I like is actually, bang. Before she could finish her sentence, the car lost control and hit the guardrail on the side of the road. Wei Wei Bai was almost sent flying. Lu Zixi also hit his head, and blood gushed out from his forehead. Wei Wei Bai's pupils shrank. Hurry and hit the brakes. But it was too late. The car broke through the guardrail and rolled down. Below the guardrail was a slope. Fortunately, the slope wasn't long, and the car rolled a few times before landing. Wei Wei Bai heard the system's voice. Minimum life guarantee activated. This function was only activated when life was in danger. She was dizzy, but she didn't feel any pain. Instead, she was filled with grief and indignation. Every time I'm brought to the cemetery to visit my mother, I get into a car accident. Do I have something against the cemetery? System, maybe she has a grudge with someone else's mother. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about anything else. She turned around and saw Lu Zixi collapsed in the driver's seat, his head covered in blood. She opened the broken car door and struggled to drag him out. Lu Zixi opened his eyes in confusion and stared blankly at Wei Wei Bai. She was so slender and weak, but she used all her strength to drag him out of the car. Lu Zixi's lips moved. Wei, he had taken her in such a perverted manner and had even done such a thing to her. She couldn't be with the person she liked. She should hate him. How could she risk her life to save him? Wei Wei Bai couldn't speak. Lu Zixi was too heavy. She couldn't even catch her breath, so how could she have the time to confess? With great difficulty, he managed to drag him to an open space. She was so tired that she was paralyzed. She sat next to him. Wei Wei Bai gasped for breath. She suddenly remembered that she was still confessing. What a good opportunity this was. The beauty saved the bear. Confessing now would definitely have the best effect. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips. Tears fell, and she called out pitifully to Lu Zixi. Brother. Lu Zixi struggled to look at her, but saw that her bright and clear eyes were filled with worried tears. For the first time, he finally understood. She was different from them. She had never been polluted. She was pure and kind beyond compare. Even in the face of a pervert like him, she was still worried about him. Lu Zixi smiled bitterly. Wei Wei, I'll let you go, ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 85. Wei Wei Bai opened her mouth to say, the person I like is, Lu Zixi's head tilted. He was completely dizzy. Wei Wei Bai. Your sister, wake up. I haven't confessed yet. Comma. Chapter 474. Wei Wei Bai and Lu Zixi both entered the hospital. Lu Zixi's head was broken. The blood looked frightening, but because his head was hard, he didn't even have a concussion. So he woke up very quickly. After Xiao Yi got the news, he hurried to the hospital. How did a car accident happen? Xiao Yi was carrying bags full of Lu Zixi's clothes, as well as Wei Wei Bai's. Because she was hospitalized. Lu Zixi housekeeper hadn't arrived yet, so he sped to the hospital first. The crew had also completely shut down. It was just a scene that Lu Zixi had invested in, so he could bear the losses no matter how long it was stopped. Lu Zixi's head was wrapped in bandages, and he turned his head with difficulty to look at the bed next to him. He had requested the double ward. Wei Wei Bai's injuries were actually more serious than his, but she was still able to drag him along and walk so far. She lay quietly, her face so pale that it was almost transparent. Just looking at her made one's heart ache. He said, "Be quiet, don't disturb Wei Wei." Xiao Yi glanced at Wei Wei Bai lying in the bed next to his and finally couldn't help but ask, "What's going on?" "I've been holding it in for a long time." "What's your relationship with Wei Wei Bai?" The car was heading to the cemetery. He had known Lu Zixi for a long time, so of course he knew that today was the anniversary of Lu Zixi's mother's death. Lu Zixi and Wei Wei Bai had gotten into an accident in the same car at the same time. He had no choice but to ask. Lu Zixi was silent, and a trace of grief and struggle appeared in his eyes. Xiao Yi saw that something was wrong and asked with embarrassment, "What's wrong?" It was a simple question, but why did it feel like Lu Zixi was in so much pain that he wanted to die? Lu Zixi stared blankly for a moment before finally giving up and saying dejectedly, "She's my sister." "Xiao Yi, did you do it or did you do it by blood?" Lu Zixi whispered, "By blood. Her mother is Bai Ziwen." Xiao Yi thought of the Lu family's fucked up love and hate and suddenly had the urge to curse. He couldn't help but ask, "Then what are your feelings for Wei Wei Bai? Do you plan to acknowledge her or take revenge?" Lu Zixi had been too erratic recently. He said that his biological sister was back, but in the end, he said that it was a mistake. This made everyone dumbfounded. Lu Zixi pursed his lips and couldn't help but laugh at himself. How could I bear to retaliate against her? Xiao Yi finally realized that something was wrong. He looked at Uncle Lu, who looked like he was about to die, and then at Wei Wei Bai, who was lying on the hospital bed. His mind suddenly opened up as if it was struck by lightning. "Wait, you, Lu Zixi sighed. "Yes, I'm in love with her." Xiao Yi's mind went blank. Close relatives will give birth to mental retardation, and it's also illegal. Lu Zixi's expression darkened, and he gloomily looked at Xiao Yi. Xiao Yi really wanted to slap himself a few times. Of all things, why did he have to mention this? Lu Zixi smiled bitterly. "That's what she said too. But I know she doesn't like me, so she deliberately made me angry." Xiao Yi blurted out, "Who would like their own brother? It's not like they're perverts, don't you think?" Lu Zixi, "It feels like I've been stabbed by a knife." Uncle Lu's face darkened again. Xiao Yi immediately said, No, I think you're so handsome. Those who don't like you aren't women, hee hee." Lu Zixi tried to suppress his anger, but then became sad again. "I thought that by locking her up, she would be moved by me sooner or later." Xiao Yi was shocked. "Fuck, you're illegally imprisoning her. You didn't do anything stupid like force yourself on her, did you? That's a crime that starts at 3 years in prison." Lu Zixi was silent. It felt like he'd been stabbed several times. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 475. Xiao Yi felt that he should seal his mouth, but Lu Zixi had done something worse than a beast. It was painful for him to hold it in. Xiao Yi looked sympathetically at Wei Wei Bai, who was lying on the hospital bed. He couldn't help it. "You couldn't have hated her because you couldn't get her, so you pulled her into a car and died together, right?" Lu Zixi was silent. In fact, it was because he heard that she had someone she liked that he was momentarily distracted by the pain and got into the car accident. But in that instant, did he really not have the thought of pulling her down with him? Xiao Yi couldn't help but move his chair a little farther away from him. He liked his own sister, imprison her, and forced her into a car accident. In the end, he couldn't get what he wanted, so he took her down with him. He was a complete pervert. Lu Zixi mood was complicated, but in the end, it turned into a helpless sigh. When she wakes up this time, I will let her go. She had clearly suffered so much, but she was still so kind. He was a monster who had long sunk into the mud of darkness. What qualifications did he have to drag her down with him to hell? Xiao Yi coughed softly. It's good that you've thought it through. Why don't you look at what you've done? This is your own sister. No matter how horny you are, you can't lay your hands on such a young child. Moreover, you imprisoned her, forced her to do that, and even wanted to drag her down with you. She must have had 8 lifetimes of bad luck to meet you. The more Xiao Yi spoke, the more his sense of justice exploded. Wei Wei Bai was too pitiful. How could she have met such a perverted brother who was worse than a beast? This kind of brother should be hung up and shot. Lu Zixi, I feel like I'm riddled with holes. So many knives are stabbing me into a sieve. Xiao Yi felt good for a moment, but when he was done, he discovered that Lu Zixi was eerily looking at him. The two were silent for a while. The air was so quiet. Wei Wei Bai suddenly groaned in pain, breaking the unspeakable silence. The two men suddenly looked up at her. But she didn't wake up, and remained quietly unconscious. Lu Zixi's tired eyes revealed traces of sadness. He closed his eyes. You go. Xiao Yi's mouth. You're not thinking of doing something to your unconscious sister, are you? Lu Zixi almost vomited blood. He couldn't bear it. He picked up a pillow and threw it at Xiao Yi's face. Scram, or I'll withdraw your investment. Xiao Yi could only scram. After Xiao Yi left, only the two of them were left in the ward. Lu Zixi struggled to get up and moved to her bedside. Wei Wei Bai was wearing a hospital gown. There was not a trace of blood on her face. She was terrifyingly fragile. Her slender body looked even more frail and helpless now. He reached out and gathered her messy long hair into a bundle and placed it beside the pillow. Her black hair was a stark contrast to her pale face. She was obviously very haggard, but he actually thought that she was extremely cute. Fortunately, he's fine. Lu Zixi was truly afraid. He held her soft, seemingly boneless hand. With traces of fear in his eyes, he couldn't help but lower his head and kiss her fingers. She felt the familiar heat on her fingers. He couldn't help but tremble. Fortunately, you're fine. The doctor said that she was out of danger and would probably wake up tomorrow. The moment he heard that she was fine, he collapsed. This was the first time he truly experienced the feeling of liking someone, to the point that his emotions fluctuated with her. Only when Lu Zixi was facing death did he realize that loving someone wasn't the same as imprisoning them. Instead, he hoped that she could be happy. Wei Wei Bai slept for a long time. After she woke up, she groggily said to the system, "Is Lu Zixi awake yet? I'm in a hurry to confess." To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 476. System, you've been sleeping for 3 days. Wei Wei Bai, so? System, Lu Zixi left. Wei Wei Bai, what? System, he suddenly realized that he was ashamed to face the pure and kind you. He was covered in filth and darkness, but you were as beautiful as an angel. He was afraid of tarnishing your purity, so he automatically left your side and let you spread your beautiful wings and fly into the sky. Wei Wei Bai had an expression that said, "What the hell are you talking about? Why don't I understand?" The system showed her Lu Zixi's movements for the past few days. After Lu Zixi left the hospital, he left the caregiver and the housekeeper to take care of her. Then he went to the company to deal with some matters and signed a share transfer agreement. He gave her 40% of his shares. He gave her a lifetime of glory and wealth. Then he went abroad. Wei Wei Bai. She said that she had only slept for 3 days and thought that 3 years had passed. Lu Zixi actions were faster than a tornado. Wei Wei Bai struggled to get up. No, if he's gone for a few years, I'll die a horrible death. System, your calf is broken and will probably take a month to recover. You can't go find him now. Wei Wei Bai, my leg is broken and I still tried my best to save him. He didn't even think that I love him. System, Wei Wei Bai struggled a few times before lying back down. System, aren't you going to find him? Wei Wei Bai, my leg hurts. System, don't you love him to the point that it hurts? Wei Wei Bai, I don't love him anymore. System, Wei Wei Bai had no choice. Her leg really hurt too much. Without the life support, she was in so much pain that she couldn't walk. Fortunately, there were still a few months. There was no rush. By the time Wei Wei Bai's calf was almost healed, almost a month had passed. Whether it was calling or inquiring, it was as if Lu Zixi had disappeared. Xiao Yi had come over a few times, and every time, he had a loving look on his face. There are only a few scenes left. You can just fill them up in the future. Rest well. If she asked about Lu Zixi's whereabouts, Xiao Yi's expression was one of pity, benevolence, and anger. Finally, he said earnestly, let the past be the past. You will be happy. It wasn't your fault. You have to work hard to get rid of the past and welcome a better tomorrow. Wei Wei Bai, no, she was just looking for an older brother. Why was the whole world against her? Wei Wei Bai, Tongzi, where is Lu Zixi? The system replied, he's out of the country. It's too far, I can't see him. Wei Wei Bai sighed, what's the use of raising you? Wei Wei Bai, this can't go on. By the time Lu Zixi comes back, the grass on my grave will probably be as tall as his. As she spoke, she dragged a laptop over. After turning it on, she immediately started typing. The system looked over. It saw a conspicuous title appear in its host's hand. Green Tea Sister, it's more like Green Tea Bitch Sister. Bai Weiwei wrote a long article about the Green Tea Mimi's black material. I know some old news about that Green Tea Sister who's been especially popular recently. This woman looks pure on the surface, but who knows how many beds she's slept with in private. System, host, what's wrong with you? Are you blackmailing yourself? Wei Wei Bai continued to write familiarly. That's right, I want to blackmail until the whole internet knows. Didn't Lu Zixi leave the country? I want to blackmail at least internationally for him to see. Chapter 477. System, why are you defaming yourself? Wei Wei Bai, Lu Zixi knows that I'm pure, cute, kind, and beautiful, right? System, why aren't you blushing when you say that? Wei Wei Bai, so Lu Zixi can tell at a glance that these revelations are fake, and I've been defamed to the point of no return. Everyone spurns me, so I don't believe that he won't come back. After all, 85 favorability was already very high. Wei Wei Bai fabricated a lot of false information. What Green Tea Sister bought herself a hot search to hype her debut. Then she used all kinds of unspoken rules to get the role in Dreamlike Blossoms. Otherwise, how could a newcomer with no works get a role in a big production movie? She must have slept it out. Wei Wei Bai knew that the more malicious and extreme the comments were, the farther they could spread. And it would cause an internet crusade. There must be a group of strong attackers. Was there anything more offensive than Lu Zixi's fans? Wei Wei Bai scrolled through her phone. There were some photos of herself and Lu Zixi. Some of them were in the crew. After choosing for a long time, she deliberately cut the photos with Photoshop. Finally, she came up with a photo that she was satisfied with. It was a photo of her in a dance costume, a little revealing, with her hand on Lu Zixi's shoulder. This photo was taken by someone else. Lu Zixi's back was to the camera, so his face couldn't be seen. So this photo, with some exaggerated words, was evidence of Wei Wei Bai seducing Lu Zixi. Sure enough, when the photo came out, she wrote, "Green tea bitch sister is still in the crew seducing the movie king." Although the movie king doesn't want her, it doesn't stop her from desperately sticking to him. Weibo completely exploded. Fans attacked Wei Wei Bai one after another. Like I said, what green tea bitch? She's just a green tea bitch. She's so ugly, yet she's still hyping up some fairy sister. Look at that chin, those eyes are so big. She must have opened the corners of her eyes. Disgusting, she actually dares to seduce our brother movie king. Get lost, get lost. She must have slept it out. Otherwise, how could a newcomer with no works appear in Dreamlike Blossom's crew? Wei Wei Bai erased all traces on the internet. No one would be able to find out who leaked the news. Then, he took a look at Weibo. Very good, it was the second most searched topic. The first was news from the production team of Flower Blossom. She took another look at the comments on Weibo. As she read, she fell silent. The system asked, "What is it?" Was it because the comments were too ugly, so he was upset? Wei Wei Bai rubbed her chin, feeling a little conflicted. So my chin is so perfect that it looks like it's been fixed. Wei Wei Bai, it even said that my eyes are so big that the corners of my eyes are wide open. Although I'm happy that my eyes are wide open, they're not as beautiful as me. Wei Wei Bai, my lips are fixed. I'm not that perfect, he. The system silently plugged in its earplugs. The host's narcissistic ways were really changing with each passing day. There were so many different ways, and they were super irritating to the eyes. Lu Zixi rubbed the bridge of his nose and tiredly got off the plane. Because of the transfer of assets to Wei Wei Bai, he urgently went abroad to deal with his grandfather. His grandfather was especially dissatisfied with his behavior. After all, he had a grudge against Bai Ziwen and her mother. His grandfather hated them to the bone. It wasn't easy to appease him, and now he was anxious to return home. Even if he had to leave her, he couldn't bear to be so far away from her. As soon as he got off the plane, he received a call from Xiao Yi. "Where did you go? Your sister is in trouble." Chapter 478. Lu Zixi's heart jumped, and his voice trembled. What's wrong? Didn't they say that the car accident had no effect? Why did it suddenly turn bad? Xiao Yi, the whole internet is black. Your fans are too scary. I tried to clarify things for Wei Wei Bai, but I was still killed. Xiao Yi didn't dare to directly expose that Wei Wei Bai was Lu Zixi's sister. After all, the Lu family was a powerful family. If Lu Zixi didn't express his position, how could he dare to expose it? So he could only clarify that Wei Wei Bai wasn't involved in the unspoken rules. As a result, he was slandered by fans for sleeping with Wei Wei Bai. Xiao Yi was so scared that he peed his pants. If Lu Zixi came back and saw this black material, he would skin him alive. Lu Zixi frowned and went online. Seeing the extreme fan comments, his face immediately darkened. He gripped his phone. Where's Wei Wei? Internet words could kill. With so many nasty words, would she be frightened? Xiao Yi, she seemed to have seen the black material online and ran out of the hospital. I don't know where she went. Lu Zixi's eyes turned malicious. You actually let her go missing. Xiao Yi trembled with fear. It was a moment of negligence, Lu Zixi said angrily. Enough, hurry up and find her. He couldn't believe that Wei Wei Bai would be hurt so much after seeing the crazy comments online. Lu Zixi searched with all his might and soon found Wei Wei Bai. She was in a small rented apartment. She hadn't gone out for a few days. Lu Zixi hurried over. Wei Wei Bai was cutting cucumbers and putting them on her face. System, the male lead is here. The door will open in 1 minute. Wei Wei Bai's hand trembled, and she hurriedly took the cucumber off her face and threw it in the trash can. Then she held the knife and spun it around. I haven't put on makeup yet. My appearance is too sloppy, it's not good for favorability. What should I do? Suddenly, the door opened. Wei Wei Bai, who was still spinning around a second ago, immediately changed her expression. She rubbed her eyes, and her beautiful almond-shaped eyes turned red. Her petal-like lips pursed and a sorrowful expression appeared on her face. His hair was messy because he didn't take care of it. He was wearing pajamas and a shoe on one foot. He looked unkempt. Lu Zishi opened the door with the key the landlord had given him and saw his sister. She was holding a fruit knife and standing there with a sad expression on her face. He immediately thought that she was going to commit suicide. Wei Wei, don't do anything stupid. He was so nervous that his muscles ached as he stared at the knife in her hand. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss for a moment. What kind of stupid thing was this? She looked at the knife in her hand. Cutting cucumbers. Lu Zishi held his breath. Don't hurt yourself. I can handle the things on the internet. Don't listen to them. Wei Wei Bai was so weak and helpless. She had been attacked by so many words. How desperate would a person have to be to hide here and want to commit suicide? But he left her behind and went abroad. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 87. Wei Wei Bai finally reacted. She looked at Lu Zishi in a daze, tears falling from her eyes. Didn't you not want me anymore? Why did you come back? Lu Zishi was so distressed that he didn't know what to say. It's all Big Brother's fault. How could I not want you? Wei Wei Bai got into character in a second. She looked at him, aggrieved and sorrowful. They're all talking about me. They're saying that I sleep with other men. Lu Zishi slowly approached her, a bitter taste in his throat. You don't. They're all bad people. Don't listen to them. Wei Wei Bai was dazed for a moment. They're not wrong. I'm nothing. How can I act? If everyone abandons me, what's the point of living? Lu Zishi suddenly stepped forward, snatched the knife from her hand, and threw it away. Then he pulled her into his arms and hugged her tightly. His eyes were wet. I want you, Wei Wei. Big Brother wants you. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 90. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. She foolishly looked up, her eyes full of clear tears. Big Brother. She whispered. Lu Zishi felt like his heart was about to be crushed. I like you. Lu Zishi stared blankly, his mind blank. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 479. She was willing to like him. Even if it was only a slight liking. It was enough to make him shed tears of gratitude. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 95. Wei Wei Bai buried her face in his warm chest. She finally couldn't hold on any longer, and her body began to tremble. Soft, broken sobs rang out softly. Lu Zishi knew that she had endured too much. Whether it was the pain of her childhood, the hurt he had caused her, or even the crazy condemnation of the netizens. It had all become a huge pressure, oppressing her to the point where she had nowhere to run. Lu Zishi gently and lovingly placed kisses on her hair. He constantly comforted her. Finally, Wei Wei Bai fell asleep in his arms, exhausted. His eyes were full of tenderness as he carried her to bed, wiped her tears, and covered her with a quilt. Then he sat by the bed in a daze and watched her all night. She had thick black hair, snow-white skin, cherry lips, and a delicate and cute nose. She was simply perfect. Lu Zishi smiled foolishly. It was great that she liked him. The system nibbled on its chocolate, thinking expressionlessly, a drama queen with exaggerated acting skills and a stupid male lead with a hole in his head. What a good match. Hee hee. Bai Ziwen was in dire straits. She had clearly paid off her 10 million gambling debt and was planning to quit gambling. But for some reason, she was fooled by the people at the casino. She foolishly gambled again. Now, not only was the remaining 5 million gone, but she also owed several million in gambling debts. She had a miserable life. Then she thought of her cheap daughter. She searched and found that Wei Wei Bai had been miserably slandered on the internet. It was said that she had sold her body in exchange for a movie role, and that she had been humiliated by the film emperor. When Bai Ziwen saw this, an idea suddenly flashed through her mind. Right now, there was no specific news that Lu Zixi had recognized Wei Wei Bai as his sister. If she revealed on the internet that Wei Wei Bai was Lu Zixi's sister, then wouldn't Lu Zixi have no choice but to recognize her cheap daughter? Bai Ziwen was also forced into a corner. The gambling debt was too big. First, she would let Wei Wei Bai enter the Lu family, and then she would swindle Wei Wei Bai to pay off the debt. She immediately began to expose all the evidence. She had some intimate photos with Lu Rinjia, photos of her pregnancy, and Wei Wei Bai's birth certificate. There were also paternity tests and so on. As long as these were exposed, Wei Wei Bai's name. At that time, Lu Zixi. She would definitely be grateful to her mother. Bai Weiwei cried too much. When she woke up, she felt that her eyes were swollen. She rubbed her eyes. Lu, after getting off the bed, he went to the living room and saw a slender figure standing by the window. It was Lu Zixi. His back was to her, and he was giving orders on his phone. Suddenly, he turned around and saw Bai Weiwei standing by the sofa with a confused look. He put away his phone and eagerly walked up to her. He picked her up by the waist and placed her on the sofa. The floor is cold. Don't step on it barefoot. Wei Wei Bai had just woken up. Her eyes were hazy. She lazily said, Big brother. Lu Zixi saw that her eyes were misty, her lips were redder than usual, and her skin was as white as a delicate porcelain doll's. His heart was hit by a dull thud. This was called breathtaking. He followed his instincts and kissed the corner of her lips. Wei Wei Bai blankly allowed him to kiss her. He took advantage of the situation and kissed her ear. He gently sucked. When he saw that her ear was red from sensitivity, he couldn't help but chuckle. Address of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. Download address of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button below to record your reading record. Chapter 480. He suppressed his desire and said in a hoarse voice, Wei Wei Bai, don't call me brother anymore. Wei Wei Bai blushed and looked at him in confusion. He couldn't help but say with a gentle expression, I've already asked someone to clarify the rumors on the internet. Also, I plan to marry you. Wei Wei Bai said, but we're brother and sister. Lu Zixi smiled, I'll have someone edit all your past information. No one will know you're my sister, so you don't have to call me brother. Although it was cute for her to call him brother. Even more, he wanted her to call him hubby. Wei Wei Bai blinked, can I? Isn't that falsifying information? Lu Zixi looked at her obedient appearance and suddenly felt a little sorry for her. Siblings in love. It was like walking on the tip of a knife, falling into hell at any moment. He actually started to feel sorry for her. She would encounter so many difficulties when she was with him. When he loved someone, he started to feel sorry for her future. But should he let her go? Lu Zixi's heart was crushed into pieces just thinking about it. It's okay, leave it to me. Lu Zishi suppressed all his worries into his heart and revealed a gentle smile. Wei Wei Bai looked at him worriedly and finally sighed, "It's okay, I won't leave you." These words were a reassuring pill, and the darkness in Lu Zishi's heart was dispelled. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 96. Wei Wei Bai said, "It's good to have a sister-con brother. Flirt with him and the favorability will increase." System said, "Brothers who have ideas about their own sisters are worse than beasts." Wei Wei Bai, System said, "Sisters who have ideas about their own brothers are brainless." Wei Wei Bai, System said, "That's why beasts are worse than beasts. If they're not retarded, who's retarded?" Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. System said, "Build a new style, talk about morality, resist obscenity." Wei Wei Bai, "I really want to block the system." Lu Zishi asked someone to tidy up the apartment. Then, he led Wei Wei Bai back. Halfway through the journey, there was a traffic jam and it started to drizzle. Lu Zishi frowned. "Can we take a detour?" This was the busiest road in the city, and the traffic jam would last at least half an hour. The driver said awkwardly, "Young master, the car is stuck in the middle and can't get out." Lu Zishi could only wait patiently. He turned to look at Wei Wei Bai and realized that she was leaning against the window. He followed her gaze. In the drizzle, there was a dessert shop not far away. This dessert shop was famous for its delicious desserts. Thinking that there would be a long traffic jam, Lu Zishi suddenly opened the car door and walked out in the rain. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. She turned around and saw that he was already far away. She quickly asked the driver for an umbrella and hurried over. Lu Zishi bought a few pieces of cherry cake and a milk drink. When he paid the bill, the clerk looked at him with a red face. Only then did he remember that his face was particularly troublesome. Before anyone reacted, he immediately walked out of the shop. In the distance, he saw a petite figure holding an umbrella, anxiously looking for someone in the rain. When she saw him, her eyes lit up, revealing a smile that curved her eyebrows. Wei Wei Bai trotted to his side, raised her hand high, and covered his head with the umbrella. Lu Zishi quickly lowered his head and took out a small cake from the bag. "I was afraid you were hungry, so I went to buy something to eat." Wei Wei Bai smiled, lowered her head, and took a bite of the cake. Then she raised her head, her eyebrows carrying traces of stunning charm. With cream on her lips, she sweetly said, "It's delicious." You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.